watch some debates, Christianity versus paganism, Jesus mythicism debates. Share the link. It's gonna be a good one. Give it a like. I need your help to get the word out there. You can't let these morons dominate the conversation. How'd all the idiots get in charge? What's up, guys? Good evening. Late night stream back again. Gonna go over some debates I've been meaning to watch. First one that happened recently, Christianity versus paganism, the debate on Frojax, who had me on. And then we'll see how long we can do that one. And then we'll check out one that I've seen before, but not for a while. 1.5 million views 9 years ago. Bart Ehrman versus Dr. Robert Price. Did Jesus exist? From what I remember, Robert Price did a terrible job. So we'll have to rewatch that, take another look at it. So appreciate everybody for being here up late with me once again. Doing what we do. Not able to do it without you guys though. powerchat.live/knowmorenews. I'm going to get it pinned to the top. Oh, it is pinned to the top of the stream. Cool. They got some new Twitter stream. They just announced some new Twitter stream. So I wonder if it's going to be any different than it was before, because it seems like streaming's not big on Twitter for some reason. Maybe because there's no super chats, power chats, and nobody in the chat. Yeah, we're night crew maxing. All right, let's start. I think this is a Christian identity guy too. So it's not just like a pagan versus any Christian. It's a pagan versus the fringiest, most heretical, delusional, extreme type of Christian. A guy that thinks that Europeans are actually the lost tribes of Israel. So let's see. And I've never seen this pagan guy before. We'll see how he does. I think we have, I know somebody, or somebody follows me that knows him or something. I saw some DM or post about it. So we'll see.
Sure. Yep. My name is Rich Tidwell. I am essentially a YouTube pastor at this point, although we do meet in person as well. Been in ministry for a long time, been a Christian for over 2 decades. And I actually enjoy polemics. So I appreciate Aiden getting onto this and being willing to debate. And I genuinely appreciate Aiden's willingness to write up a rebuttal. It showed me that he was genuine in his refutations. And I'm looking forward to addressing them this evening. You guys can check out more about me at richtidwell.com and also at youtube.com/richtidwell or Instagram X. I'm on those platforms as well. Really appreciate you guys hosting projects. You guys are great as mediators, and I'm sure we will have a respectful debate tonight. So thank you guys.
Great. And real quick, Aiden, before you go, Rich, I see you got a mic in front of you. I don't believe the audio we're receiving is coming from that mic. It's not really bad, so if it stays that way the whole time, no big deal. Just letting you know it doesn't sound as crystal clear as the mic looks like it should be.
Oh, I see why.
You see it?
Thank
Okay.
you for telling me. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
should
of
be able
course.
to.
Oh
How's
yeah.
that?
Ooh.
Oh yeah. That's just
Much
much
better.
better. Crisp. Okay, Aiden, please go ahead, sir.
Hi,
How
my
are
name
we
is
sounding
Aiden
tonight,
Magnell. I'm a
guys?
folk builder with the Ossetru Folk Assembly.
Oh,
We are
Asatru,
the oldest
Asatru.
and most prolific heathen group that exists in America and
Okay,
in
we got a real pagan here. How am I compared to their audio, by the way? Let me know. Do I need to go up or down, chat?
And I've been doing this for like maybe 5 years, specifically folk building for 2. And I've been writing for a good amount of time. I write on Substack. You can find me under folkism.substack or the Enchiridion, also under my name, Aiden Macmillan.
I wonder if he follows
And
me.
I'm glad that you guys are willing to host, and thank you, Rich, for showing up. I'm very pleased.
Good to have you both here. So,
All right, we can start with the 10-minute opening statement, starting with Rich. And if you extend long enough, I'll be giving you a 1-minute warning just to wrap up the segment.
and it's going to be opening statements
Yep.
and then 10 minutes each on the resurrection. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, very good.
All right, the floor is yours, Rich, starting now.
All right. So my opening is for the case for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And in context, we put together this debate because we are debating the 8 criteria for who ethnic Israel is. That's my study. Aiden has responded to that, and I appreciate that. But we're starting with the resurrection of Jesus. The reason why is because ethnic Israel matters because of its claims about the Messiah, and the Messiah being Jesus Christ and his resurrection. So if he resurrected, everything he said matters and his ancestry matters. If he didn't resurrect, then really nothing he said matters because he was a liar or a lunatic, but not Lord. And so we are hinging this entire debate on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And then,
That's crazy because Amalek just posted a clip of Fuentes saying the exact same thing in an interview that came out today. That's crazy. I'll pull it up. Watch, you'll see.
as a result, ethnic Israel matters. Here are my primary evidences for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Just in brief. The earliest resurrection creed, which is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 7, dates to within 2 to 5 years of the crucifixion, far too early for legend, and it names living eyewitnesses who could be questioned. So if these people were lying and this was being recorded within a few years of the resurrection, people could have addressed that at the time. So having over 500 eyewitnesses listed, including named witnesses, was significant in the early era. All 4
Wait,
Gospels.
hold on. Did he just say 500 witnesses? Like Paul claiming that 500 saw Jesus? That's what he's counting? That can't be what I just heard. 34:10. Here we go.
So if these people were lying and this was being recorded within a few years of the resurrection,
Paul wasn't. The earliest texts we have are speaking of a heavenly Jesus. They weren't lying. They were inventing him mystically in Jewish mysticism and midrash. That's where it was. Nobody's going to be like, oh, he didn't exist when they weren't even teaching that he existed on earth.
could have addressed that at the time. So having over 500 eyewitnesses listed, including named witnesses, was significant.
They're not listed. He just says, and then he appeared to 500. It's in Paul's letter, not even in any of the Gospels. That's how you know it didn't actually happen. The greatest appearance to the most people in public and doesn't make it in the Gospels. None of those people are listed. None of those people went on and told anybody they could write it down and it was preserved to know it was real. Off to a bad start.
In the early era. All 4 Gospels list women as primary witnesses of the resurrection. In a culture where women's testimony was legally inadmissible, which Josephus in Antiquities, Book 4, Chapter 8, Section 15 confirms this. Their statements were not admissible in court. No one fabricating this story in that era would have invented female witnesses. It actually hurt.
Yeah, they would. This has already been debunked. Mark has a theme of the reversal of expectation. So the last will be first and all these other things like that. So having women appear first, there was some symbolic construct, literary construct that was also matching as well. I think that might have even been from a pagan Homeric theme. That's what that's explained for. He's like, oh, it must be real. They would have never made up that it was women first. Like, this is just pilpul apologetic BS. Oh, here's Nick, by the way. Here's Nick. Let's see, will this work? Yeah, there we go. Saying the exact same thing. I wasn't going to show these until maybe tomorrow, but it's the exact same thing. So I just want to see it.
I'm curious, like, what makes you so, like, sure that Jesus is God? Because I've, like, explored all religions. You probably see me looking at Islam, looking at Christianity. I haven't really, like, decided even yet, but I'm kind of curious, like, what is it for you that solidifies that Jesus Christ is God?
That's obviously the most important question of all time. And to me, there's really two central things, because I've been thinking a lot about this.
Yeah.
You consider that the Muslim-Christian debate has been going on for 1,300 years,
You're right? Yeah.
If the prophet died in what, the 7th, 8th century, he's born in what, 670 or 570?
670.
I forget, 670.
Yeah.
So this has been going on for over 1,000 years. And I look at the Christian-Muslim debates, and you got to think it's been fleshed out. We know the disagreements.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking we got to be able to boil it down to a couple of things. Because when you get into the weeds with Christians and Muslims, there's a lot of arguments that are thrown out, but surely there must be a crux of the debate that it comes to. And it's two things.
What is this, like, false dichotomy? He asked, like, why do you think Jesus is really God? Why do you think Christianity is real? And he's like, well, let me compare you to what the Muslims say. It's like, isn't that convenient? Oh, go fight with some Arabs about who the true Jewish Messiah is. That's your proof?
One is the nature of God. Because what Muslims preach is Tawhid, the absolute oneness of God, that there's no Trinity.
Right.
Because the Christians believe it's Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Muslims say, no, it's the absolute unity and the oneness of Allah. So it's really the nature of God. And the second thing is the resurrection of Christ. Because even St. Paul says this in the Bible. He says, if Christ was not raised from the dead, then everything else is in vain.
Yep.
It all rides on whether he rose from the dead. And that is a historical question. That's a question of historicity. It either happened or it didn't.
Yep.
And if it happened, then what he said was true. Because what he said is, I am. Before Abraham was, I am. He said he was God. And if he died on the cross and rose again, that would prove all of his claims. If he didn't, then obviously it's false. So with regard to the question of Christ, what Muslims say is that Christ never died. They say he lived.
Yeah.
He was a prophet. He was sent by God as a messenger. They say, but
he's a myth, Nick. Not only did he obviously not resurrect from the dead and appear to a handful of his closest disciples in private. No, he didn't do a victory lap and go to Pilate and go to Herod and tour the world and sculptures and any proof and anybody writing about him in contemporary at all whatsoever. No, he started as a myth. He got historicized later on. So, I mean, not only did he not resurrect, he didn't even exist.
He was never crucified. He ascended into heaven.
Yeah.
And so you wonder then, well, what really happened then at Calvary? Who was crucified? And what Muslims say is that at the last minute, a body double went up on the cross, a look-alike.
That for me was kind of like, that's kind of strange. Just like you're kind of grasping for straws. Is there a body double? Like, what are we doing?
That doesn't make any sense. And then I think they don't like to talk about that because
that's such a conspiracy theory, huh?
Except for one, were crucified or martyred for their religion. In other words, they were put to death under the pain because they would not deny the divinity of Christ. And so did all of the other early Christian martyrs. Christ appeared to thousands of people after the resurrection.
Really? Thousands?
So I think it's hard to make the case.
I don't know about thousands. That's not the Christian lore. He appeared to 500, a few, James, Peter, and Paul.
Christianity would spread under persecution in the way that it did through martyrs if a body double went up or if the crucifixion never happened.
Right.
So that's a huge one for me.
So basic bitch apologetics, they wouldn't die for a lie. Yeah, they would. And they weren't always given a chance. Many of them probably did renounce the faith, and some of them probably weren't even given an option to. And a whole lot of the martyrdom legend are just that, later traditions and legends that are not historical, no historical basis for them. So, I mean, every religion has their martyrdom stories. If martyrdom's true, then I guess that means Islam and Judaism's true, because there's been Jewish and Muslim martyrs. Is this really what we're doing? Paul counts as 500, I guess. Yeah, this is really weak stuff. But I mean, it's not like a knock on Nick. This is just Christian apologetics. This is how the low tier, low grade, weak as shit Christian apologetics that have been refuted 7 ways from Sunday. The resurrection. You trust a couple messianic Jews 2,000 years ago that God's son appeared to them and only them? You trust that? You believe in the Jewish resurrection of the dead?
I'm curious, like, what makes you so, like, sure that Jesus is God? Because I've, like, explored all religions.
Where's the other thing?
See me
there it is.
Islam,
Talking to me. He talked to me too. Tyson did. We did a stream.
Rather than helps the cause. So we can't apply our modern mind to it. We have to look at it according to what Josephus said. He was not a Christian, by the way. He was just a Jew. Jewish authorities spread the story that the disciples stole the body, implicitly conceding the tomb was empty. They never produced a body, which would have instantly ended the movement. And even the reason why we're talking about this 2,000 years
that was according to the story. The story's true because it has this detail that tries to make it look like it's true. Okay.
Because no body was ever produced.
Probably it's because Mark was the first gospel, and afterwards people like, you guys, he probably didn't resurrect. He probably you guys just stole the body. So then in version 2, in Matthew and Luke, they go, no, they claim that they stole the body, but they prove that they didn't. It was like one of those type of things. Addressing the skeptics. Innovation. Uh-oh. What's that?
That means that there was some type of failure upon the Roman army and the Jewish religious system from maintaining that body being in the tomb, because everyone knew that Jesus claimed he was going to resurrect, and it was very important to make sure that that didn't spread. It did spread. They never produced the body. We have to answer why. Roman soldiers faced execution for sleeping at their post. A group of frightened fishermen silently overpowering a trained guard unit is historically implausible. These were Western warriors. They were the best in the world.
Dude, all of these arguments are like based upon the New Testament being accurate. He's referencing the mythical story, trying to argue that the myth really happened. It's so Christ-brained, Christ-brain coded.
How a group of Israelite men who were not warriors overwhelmed them. It doesn't make sense. Yet the authorities' own cover story admits they couldn't explain the missing body. Next, the apostles suffered torture and death for claims they personally witnessed, not inherited beliefs. People do die for false beliefs. They do die for lies, but rarely for what they know firsthand to be a lie. I'm often reminded of Chuck Colson and the Watergate scandal and how quickly some of the world's most powerful men caved to pressure once they were being scrutinized. That didn't happen with these men. Most of them were put to death, and John of Patmos was exiled to an island. James was a disciple of Jesus. And
would they die for a lie? How about this? Would Jews make up a persecution story? Would a sect of Messianic Jews invent martyrdom and persecution by the Romans about them? Would that ever happen? I think we know the answer to that. Just have faith, bro, right?
He became a leader of the Jerusalem church. He died a martyr for proclaiming the resurrection, one of the earliest martyrdoms. And he's recorded in Josephus' Antiquities, book 20, chapter 9, section 1. So James is important because the external extra biblical sources actually support the idea of people converting to Christ, claiming that he resurrected, and then being put to death very early. Paul was actively persecuting and executing Christians before a dramatic reversal he attributed to a personal encounter with the risen Jesus at great personal cost. So Paul doesn't make sense. He doesn't benefit socioeconomically.
Yeah, he does. Yes, he does. He's collecting tithes from all the churches. And he's got clout and influence as an apostle of God's son. What do you mean he doesn't benefit? What are you talking about? And he didn't say he was killing. He doesn't clarify exactly how he was persecuting Christians. Saul the Pharisee decided to teach the Jewish Messiah to the Goyim, and he had nothing to benefit from it. Come on, dude.
Christians as well, because he used to persecute them. So there's a decent population of Christians who don't trust Paul. Paul loses all of his...
Yeah, your greatest proof, some Jew that never even knew a historical Jesus. He had mystical, midrashic visions of him.
When he converts to Christianity and he claims he's seen the risen Christ all the way to his beheading in Rome, his life doesn't make sense unless...
That's not in the Bible. The beheading of Rome is legend way later. I'm going to look it up right now. We'll look that up. Let's look that up. Let's ask Eve. Yo, Eve, where do we have the source about Paul's death in early Christianity?
The earliest source is 1 Clement, written around 95 AD. In chapter 5, it says Paul bore his testimony before the rulers, and then departed from the world and went unto the holy place after preaching east and west. It's the first hint he was martyred, but no details on how or exactly where. The New Testament itself doesn't record his death. Acts ends with him alive in Rome. The next layer comes from early church fathers like Ignatius, then Eusebius in the 300s, who says he was beheaded in Rome under Nero, drawing on even earlier traditions. The apocryphal Acts of Paul from the late 100s is the first to spell out the beheading story in detail, but that's later legend.
Later legend, 300 BC, Eusebius, Ignatius, all much later, not in the Bible. That's what these guys are relying on. All right.
Unless he really did witness the resurrected Christ. Jews had no concept of an individual rising bodily in the middle of history. Resurrection was expected for everyone at the end of the age. In other words, they weren't expecting not only Christ to resurrect, but it's recorded that many saints actually resurrected at the same time as Jesus in Matthew's gospel. That wasn't an expected event other than the fact that Jesus himself had prophesied it. The Shroud of Turin's...
No, you can see the verses in the Old Testament where they came up with the idea of a resurrection or to be raised up. Like dying and rising gods was also a pagan motif going on before that also. So no, we can see where they midrashically came up with the idea of him being raised from the pits and not left down in Hades and all these things like this. I have a section of my book about resurrection, the prophetic life of Jesus chapter, resurrection, some of the scriptures that you can obviously see inspired them. There's some Psalms too where they got a resurrection idea from. He goes to Shroud next. Oh God, that's how bad it is.
Is a photographic negative with 3D encoded depth data. So this image is supposedly the resurrected Christ. Here's why I believe that it's very possible it is him, is because it's a photographic negative. The surface coloration is only 200 nanometers deep, and blood chemistry consistent with real wounds is found, including the separation of serum and blood, which is exactly what the Bible records. Water and blood came out of his piercing by the spear. That's on this shroud. There's also wrist crucifixion and, like I said, the post-mortem serum separation. We'll also talk about there is a number of pollens and other indicators on the shroud itself that indicate it is authentic from Jerusalem from the 1st century. Hallucinations are
Wrong.
individual experiences.
No, dude. No. The only scientific study they did, radiocarbon dating, they took a sample and gave it to 3 different universities in the 80s, and they all dated it to 500 years ago. Okay? That's the reality. Some guy obsessed with proving that it's really from Jesus did some bullshit study recently that hasn't been peer reviewed, and it's been shot down and refuted, where it does like X-ray pictures of like the thread unraveling, and they try to do all the variables to date it right at the right time. That's not the traditional way of dating material like that. That's Noah's Ark level tabloid Bigfoot bullshit. Dude, we have the earliest documentation we have of when the thing, oh, I just disappeared, of when the shroud was first found. It's from a Catholic bishop saying that it's a forgery and they knew the dude that forged it. And then there's the second documentation of it also says it's a forgery. That's the reality. Not even the Catholic Church will argue that it's real. And they won't give any more samples to be any further testing on it either. So that's the reality. This guy's such a clown. Is he a flat earther too, dude? Believing in citing the shroud. What's crazy is Nick cited the shroud too in his little debate he had with Sneeko one time. That's what he said. That was his proof, was the shroud. Remember that?
Has no category for 500 people sharing the same vision simultaneously, as we see in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 6. What? Nor would Jews interpret such a vision as a bodily resurrection, a concept that
he's really going. One Jew claimed from hearsay that Jesus appeared to 500 people. He's citing this as his best evidence, guys. This is as good as it gets, sadly.
Of for a single individual. So in other words, we don't have a way to explain the masses of people that said they saw the resurrected Jesus in these early times. And then the resurrection was proclaimed in Jerusalem among hostile witnesses weeks after the crucifixion. If the tomb had a body, skeptics were right there to expose it. You had the government and the religious institutions who wanted to stop this from spreading, and in fact spent 300 years persecuting Christians, not just the initial witnesses who said they saw the resurrected Christ, but all the people like myself who have claimed that they've encountered Jesus since then were being persecuted for those first 300 years very heavily under Nero and other Caesars. The movement could not have survived in that city if the claims were fabricated. Those are my primary arguments for the resurrection.
Okay, all right. I guess Mormonism wouldn't survive. Mormonism wouldn't survive and be one of the fastest growing religions in America if it weren't true. You know, the same logic. Islam wouldn't have exploded to be the number 2 religion in the world with 2 billion plus people in it if it weren't true. Same argument there, dude. How are all their arguments so bad?
My arguments for the 8 criteria for who ethnic Israel is later in the debate. Thank you very much.
All right, Aiden.
Let's go.
For you to make your 10-minute opening statement, and if you reach that, I'll give you a 1-minute warning. Go ahead and begin.
Yeah, so I actually didn't think that it was going to be an opening statement directly on the resurrection. So I have a slightly different thing prepared, but I'll respond to some of the things that Rich said. He gave me enough time.
Sure.
So just as a prelude, I should explain why this debate's important to me. I was Christian identity briefly before discovering Bronze and Stone Age studies. I had been raised Presbyterian before that, and I briefly became CI after I became aware of the Jewish question. And the logical conclusions for a pro-white Christian is to then deny the chosen status of modern Jews, since they're clearly so heinous, and affirm the divine nature of white people. This leads some people into British Israelism and other CI theories. Which
nice, dude. Oh, dude, we got a guy that's done the whole arc. Woke up to the Jews, grew up Christian, learned about Jews, fell into the CI kosher trap, and then made his way out of it. So this should be good. He's going to know a lot of the CI arguments. This should be good.
People as white people while denouncing modern Jews as imposters. Basically, CI to me is a coping mechanism that allows for white Christians to retain faith in the Bible even when faced with glaring crimes done by modern Jews. It's a historical view, though. You know, later when we get into the criterion, I'll explain why. But to address Rich's main point, which is a very clever thing to do, is to want to debate the resurrection of Christ, because in his own words, if the resurrection happened, then we have to trust everything else in the Bible. I don't really think that that stands to reason, though. I mean, if it happened, that doesn't mean that I have to trust some ancient Old Testament prophecy, even if it relates to the resurrection. None of that really is that relevant to the debate itself, which is the genetic and racial and ethnic origins and existence of this supposed European Israelite groups. So it's really not that relevant, but it is a good thing to do because then it makes me have to debate the resurrection, which I'm a pagan. I don't actually care about the resurrection one way or the other. I don't believe that it's fake. I don't believe that it's some sort of fake history that was written. I don't know if it's religion. It's not really my interest. I don't really care about it.
Not a good argument, dude.
Like if someone from Somalia said, "Oh, 2,000 years ago, some chieftain did this," I'd say, "Cool, awesome, more power to you."
Well,
But
that's
it is
true. I like
interesting
that
though
point.
because I think that to me,
Ooh, Jewish Messiah resurrected. Let's all worship the King of the Jews now. Yeah, no, pass. Not interested, even if it were true, pretty much.
if
Which
I
it's
were
not.
really to give my direct answer of what I think the New Testament resurrection is, it's myth. But myth isn't
Okay.
fake. That's not what myth means. That's just the modern colloquial term that we use for like fantasy and things like that. But the etymology of myth just means discourse. So myth is just a discourse between the immaterial and material realm. Largely, it's a way for the spiritual realm to interface using symbolic language, divine symbols. It's a way for these spiritual realms to interact with the material realm. And it's obvious looking at the myth of Europe, looking at the myths of Asia, looking at the myths of the Levant, like Israel. Very obvious.
This is because he's coming from the pagan angle. He doesn't want to undermine myths because he believes in myths that are fake too. So he can attack Jesus on the basis of it being not historical, didn't really happen, because then his pagan gods also didn't really happen.
That different spiritual realms are interacting with these peoples, and that's why the myths are so different. And so, for me, I wouldn't necessarily say that the resurrection is fake or something. I'm not Adam Green. I don't believe in
What?
like he calls it the mythic Jesus.
Named? I didn't know I was named in this. Hold on. Shots fired. What? Uh-oh. Shots fired. My ears are ringing. I'm not Adam Green. I don't think the Jews made it up. I'm not crazy. I don't think the Jews wrote a fake story or nothing. Carlin's here. Laugh out loud. Mention. Dude, can anybody talk about Jesus without kvetching about Adam Green? What the hell?
Jesus. That's because he's using the modern colloquial term for myth, meaning fake. But that's not what I think that myth is. Myth is not real history. It's
What
not
do you want me to call it then, bro? What should I call it? People know when I say myth, it means it didn't really happen. It's not real. That's all that matters. Dude, this guy's, you got a semantic problem, bruh? You gonna come at me with these semantics, bruh? Okay.
made up fake nonsense, but it's not real history. And this brings me kind of to my contention with some of the things that Rich was saying. The myths of the Bible descend from very ancient Semitic myths, but that's not really how
Adam catching
that's not
strays.
really how the Bible is presented. It doesn't present itself
Yeah.
as myth. It presents itself using a historiographical framework. It tries to historicize these myths. This is something that you don't really see with other religions. They don't really do this. Of course,
It's crazy how it's like not Richard Carrier, it's not Robert Price or Richard Carrier that says Jesus is myth. It's Adam Green. That's funny.
in all religions, and that's basically what Christians and many Jews and Arabs do with their religions. And that's a trait that they get from being Semites. That's a way that they interact and interface with their myths. It's a historicizing nature. Um, and that's something that like I do
True.
have some qualms with that, but again, I don't think that that's actually relevant to any debate about the genetic and very real bona fide history of Europeans and Israelites. It doesn't matter if Jesus resurrected and if you can trust or not trust some prophecy from the Old Testament. That's not relevant to a genetic debate ultimately. So I don't really have much more to say beyond from
Guys, I should be on his side, but I don't like that argument. If Christians are hearing you say, even if Jesus really did resurrect and predicted it and was the Son of God, you still wouldn't care. If I thought if he really did, I would care. I'd be like, okay, he really is the Son of God. If that really all did happen, I don't think that's a good hill to die on from a debate standpoint. Don't you guys agree? Like saying, well, even if it was real and he really did raise from the dead and he really was the Son of God, but I still wouldn't care. It's just like, okay, well, that's weird. I would care if it was real.
some nitpicks about some things that Rich had said. Like for example, the all of the studies on the Shroud of Turin, Turinology. There's another term for it as well, because it's a massive field where Christian scientists have come to try to prove that the Shroud of Turin is truly the shroud that was wrapped around Jesus after his crucifixion. But a lot of those studies, number one, haven't been peer reviewed properly. Most of them have already been debunked. There's a large amount of the studies out to go against the Turinology, the studies around the Shroud of Turin. And ultimately, all that stuff that sort of debate tactic or that sort of rhetorical tactic that you see certain Christians doing, basically what they're saying is science has an explanatory power. It can explain nature in some way. It can give us very precise details and data that proves something is true or false. And so they realize
Nate Live says he's getting in the weeds. Just call it fake and Jewish. Seriously, dude, just stick to the basics. The Jews were never chosen. This is all a bunch of fairy tales. Like, oh, fairy tales. People get mad when I say fairy tales sometimes too. They go like, oh, that's Europeans have fairy tales and fairy tales are good and base and stuff. It's like, I gotcha. You know what I mean? They're Jewish fantasies. Jewish myths. Yeah, stick to the basics. It's fake and Jewish and gay. Jews were never chosen. They're not the prophets of God. And they can't. Prophecy's not real. Magical Jews can't predict the future. We wouldn't want to bow down to the King of the Jews and the Jewish Messiah anyway. Stick to the basics. Ancient Jewish fables. Actually, I was at the fair with the family a couple weeks ago, and they had some exhibit about like books, and then I took a picture of it. It said it explained fable, fairy tale, myth. It explained the difference between each one of them. I took a photo of it, but I didn't look at it actually.
is that science has this explanatory power. So then they attempt to utilize science and to prove something from the Bible. But it's not really an accurate way to look at science or to utilize science.
Jewish literature.
And Turinology is
Fan
an
fiction.
especially egregious field for that reason. It's filled to the brim with bad science. For example, there's this one guy who did a study on like the pollen that is found on the fibers, and it hasn't been able to be proven by anybody else. He was the only guy who could do this study, and the methodology that he used is something that if we could do that, oh man, pollen studies would be just so in depth and insightful. But he's the only guy who's ever able to do that, and you'll find this a lot with other things in the Turinology. There's not really many other things that I wanted to address, except I will say this: if the resurrection is true and the prophecies of Israel's regathering are real, they don't need genetic data to be true. They don't need Paul saying this or they use some woman here. They don't need any rhetorical arguments.
I got to
From
speed
the
this up to
Christian standpoint, they should just
1.25.
stand on their own biblical terms. You shouldn't have to be able to prove it. You shouldn't feel like you have to prove the resurrection. It's not necessarily something that requires a genetic argument on the aDNA record. It doesn't require Turinology. It doesn't require any of that. It should just be something that you believe and have faith in. And I'm not arguing against that. Again, I don't really have a dog in the fight of is the resurrection real? Isn't it real? It's not relevant to genetic studies. Yeah, I'll hand the floor back because
Dude, weak.
that's all I got to say.
All right, so it seems
You're in a dude. You're in a pagan versus Christian debate, and you're going to say, "I don't even care if like the whole crux of your religion is real or not. It's not real," and you need to say that's fake and Jewish, dude. It's a myth. It's a midrash. Your magic comic book superhero king of the Jews never existed like they said he did. Some Jews made it up. They told a story. They wrote a script. That's what you need to say, not "I don't care." All right, anyway, I'm nitpicking. Let's go. But he did call me out. Not like Adam Green. I'm not like Adam Green who thinks it's a myth.
contention is on the notion of the genetic argument for Europeans being the Israelites. Would you gentlemen prefer to jump to that topic? What are we thinking?
We do have 5-minute responses allotted each for this, but it seems like the opening statements and the topic of resurrection had some cross-pollination. So if you guys want, we can just do 5-minute responses to that each, just so that you can get a word in there. Rich, what do you guys think about that?
Go ahead, yeah.
Sure.
All right, so we're going to
Okay.
give a 5-minute rebuttal for Rich starting now, sir.
Okay, so first, I believe Aiden is obscuring the importance of the resurrection. For one, our calendar is on the basis of the resurrection. And secondly, we have to trust.
No. It's on the basis of his supposed birth, which gives different times in Matthew and Luke, and isn't even included in the first gospel, Mark. And wasn't it only like Gregorian calendar, like 500 years ago, that the Catholic Church changed our dates and times to line up with Jesus? Yeah, the Jewish Messiah religion took over, that the Jews took over, and 1,500 years later, they changed up the times to be centered on the King of the Jews. That's your proof it's real? Jeez.
What Jesus said if he did resurrect. So he either lied about resurrecting and didn't resurrect, or he told the truth. And he also affirmed the rest of the scriptures. So we have a man claiming to be Lord. In fact, in John 8:58, he says, "Before Abraham was born, I am." So he claims to be God. That's the title God gives in Exodus 3 in the Old Testament. He makes giant claims. And so if he did not resurrect, it's all nonsense. It's all myth, as Aiden's trying to proclaim that it is. I am presenting that it is historical record and that it did in fact happen. And as a result, everything he says is of consequence, and so is his nationality, and so is the nation that he descended from. So it is all related. He's not concerned about the resurrection. He calls it a myth, or, quote, not real history. But it is not a story. It is a historical record, hence the witnesses, hence the archaeological findings, hence things like the Shroud of Turin.
Wait. What archaeological findings? Did he say any archaeological findings? We have no archaeological findings of Jesus. What are you talking about? You got nothing. You don't have any eyewitnesses of Jesus, no physical description of Jesus, no extra biblical, non-Christian reference of Jesus. Until much later, Christian interpolations, or even just them aware of Christians. Wrong.
Written evidences, the extra biblical evidences, Tacitus, Suetonius, Josephus, and a number of others.
What? Come on, dude. Are we really just, oh, he definitely existed, Josephus, Tacitus. Are we really still doing this? Dude, this Christian apologetic nonsense. Josephus was not born when Jesus supposedly died. He wrote 60 years after the supposed crucifixion. It's a fake Christian interpolation. The Christians forged it in there. Tacitus is talking about a Crestus, like a slave Jewish name, in leading a revolt in Rome, I think at the wrong time. And that's 80 years later, after the fact. Come on, dude. And you're touting this as undisputable proof?
Who corroborate and converge together on the fact that there was a man named Jesus and his body disappeared. So it is not a story and it is not a myth.
Yeah, even if they were real, it's late and they were aware of what Christians said about this figure, what the Gospels wrote about this figure.
The historical record of the Bible, he says, oh, this is just like other religions. They go and do this. They just make up their myths and have these stories, but the Bible treats it like it actually happened. The problem for Mr. Aiden is that the Bible is repeatedly proven by archaeological findings and historical records.
Yeah, you're right. I'll grant him that. The debate was supposed to be about our Europeans, Israelites, and this guy tried to switch it at the last minute to be all about the resurrection. so he could do his what's that one scholar's name? Gary Habermas, resurrection apologetics. You're right.
The Bible records is what we find happened in the historical record or in the archaeological findings, even scientific findings of Scripture. For example, circumcision is commanded to be on the 8th day. No one knew why that was when that commandment was given. However, modern science proves that circumcision is done on the 8th day because that is when blood coagulates. Vitamin K is at its highest. So it is, time and time again, a historical record. It is an actual order.
No way. Dude, this guy's trying to justify. He's doing circumcision apologetics. Oh, we're chopping off God wanted us to chop off our kids' foreskins on the right day because that's when he made the blood coagulate. Are you kidding me, dude? Oh my God. I don't want to be around these Bible brains anymore. Am I heart rate maxing right now? What are we? 75. I'm a little elevated. I was chiller this morning when I was freaking out about something else.
And it is proven to be true time and time again. The Shroud of Turin, or as he's called it, Turinology, is debated. I completely concede on that. However, there are a number of tests that have been done on the shroud by a number of different people, hardly just the pollen test. But again, it is an ancient artifact, so it's not constantly under examination. It's actually typically being kept in a safe place so that it's not deteriorating further. The problem is that shroud for Aiden, the problem is that shroud has not been disproven despite what he's trying to share. It has a photographic negative, which is something that the scientists have not been able to reproduce. The closest they've gotten was doing a laser test where they tried to burn the same type of image onto similar cloth, and it was exceedingly difficult to do. In other words, there was nothing in existence at
That's wrong. That's wrong. James Tabor posted it, and also History Valley had on a guest with his theory on how they think that they made the shroud with like some lens, prism, shining sunlight onto something like that. And also, you can go on YouTube and search like making the shroud, and there's like a relief carving that they drape it on, and then like rub something on it or something.
Of this supposed forgery that could have caused this photo negative on the Shroud of Turin. The blood was laid down before the image, so the blood is on the cloth before there was ever a photo negative placed onto the cloth. The fibers under the blood are colored. This means the blood reached the linen first. There's anatomically precise wounds. And again, the pollen, which we addressed, it was Swiss criminologist Max Frier-Sulzer who lifted the pollen grains from the cloth with adhesive tape. A flowering plant
help jobs find you in your
spring is also on the cloth. There's limestone from Jerusalem on the cloth, and it's been there's been an independently documented face cloth.
Every claim he's making right here, I could almost guarantee you it's just some bullshit that some Christian made up. Limestone, pollen, just like the X-ray thing they claimed was bullshit.
Which was a separate cloth that has
the capability of Christians to lie, to try, like lying and forgery was just like commonplace in early Christianity, always in Christianity.
The exact same things on it. The hoax struggles to fit because a successful medieval forgery would require an artist who somehow encoded a photographic negative and three-dimensional data, colored only the top 200 nanometers of the fibers without pigment or brushstroke, and applied it anatomically and biochemically accurate real human blood before the image. So this is a difficult shroud to create a hoax with, and that's why there is such thing as Turinology.
All right, that is time. Aiden, 5 minutes. The floor is yours for rebuttal.
Yeah, so you did get a couple of things wrong with what I was saying. So myth isn't real history, but that doesn't mean it's fake or nonsensical. Don't get me wrong. I have great respect for myth. I just don't have the modern secular or even the Christian view towards myth that you and many secular people have. I don't think that myth is nonsense. I was very clear that it's a discourse between the spiritual immaterial realm and the material realm, and it teaches us important things that are relevant to nature and reality and things like that. But also Tacitus doesn't say that Jesus disappeared from the tomb. He just mentions the existence of Christians. And a lot of the early accounts that you're talking about, like Josephus and others, they also aren't exactly the best sources for any of these sorts of things. Now, again, I'm not actually arguing that the resurrection never happened. I have no dog in that fight. It's you who feels as though if the resurrection didn't happen, then Jesus must be a liar. And all of these prophecies and all of these Old Testament things, it all must just be one big hokey thing. I don't know why you would have to think that either way. I mean, you should just have faith in your religion. And if you think it's true, like real history true, then yeah, it is wrong. It's not real history. I mean, there's a lot of issues with the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. I mean, I know you're a young Earth guy. I know you believe in this whole Hebrew Israelites thing. You know, there's a lot of things that you believe in that you
Also, young Earth creationist believes the Earth is 6,000 years old. Shroud of Turin. It might even be a flat earther and think dinosaurs are fake. Also, I wouldn't be surprised.
extrapolate from the Bible that aren't actually relevant to archaeology, linguistics, you know, like the whole Tower of Babel thing. Like there is a theory that maybe we all spoke one language, but that can't be proven, or at least it hasn't been proven. And it's the same thing with all of the Shroud of Turin stuff. There's a lot of interesting studies, and I honestly wish that Christian scientists would put the amount of ingenuity that they've showed into the Shroud of Turin into other fields of study. But again, I mean, they've done things that they're not able to be replicated. And the things that they do bring up, there are mainstream secular reasons for why that didn't convince tons of people that that's the shroud that was wrapped up around Jesus after the crucifixion. But you, again, because of your worldview, you have to affirm that these sorts of things are real. And you know that science is a very powerful way to do that. So you're attempting to use science to prove biblical things. None of it's relevant. I mean, even if the Shroud of Turin wasn't a hoax, which I never said that it was a hoax, even if it wasn't a hoax, it doesn't prove anything about the Bible or Jesus or the Old Testament. It's just a very interesting thing that probably requires more study. But a lot of those studies probably aren't
Again,
going to
dude, I'm sorry. These are not good arguments. Again, if the shroud really was Jesus's shroud and he a burst of lightning, like a nuclear blast, imprinted his thing when he ascended to heaven, like, and so you don't care. Even if that was real, you wouldn't care. Well, then there's something wrong with you. If that were real, you should care. Take a stand. What's with the fence sitting? I don't get it. Put your foot down and say the shroud is a fake forgery and Christians forge everything and it's all fake and Jewish. Well, why not just say that?
So, you know, I don't really think that any of this is that compelling to me.
All right, well done, gentlemen. We're now going to be jumping into the main portion of the debate regarding the study on the European Israelites. Mr. Tidwell, the floor is yours for 10 minutes, and if you extend long enough, I'll be giving you a 1-minute warning beginning now.
Okay. Aiden, you know, just to wrap up what we were just talking about, the reason why it's important to me to prove it, I already believe, but I also have consequential beliefs of where a person goes eternally if they don't believe in a savior, which you're familiar with because of your upbringing. So my point for sharing anything that I'm sharing is actually to convince you of the resurrection of Jesus and his claims so that you can be saved. Ultimately, it's for your benefit, not mine, right? If it was for my benefit, I already believe that I'm saved as a result. So I want to sway you to believe that he's resurrected. So that is the reason, whether you care or not, that is the reason for the arguments. It's for your benefit, not mine. Okay.
He just wants to save us from the Jewish hell for not believing the magical Jews and their prophecies. It's so kind of you. He thought that was a good use of his 5-minute rebuttal. Yeah, I guess so.
Criteria. The question, God declared that ethnic Israel would never cease to exist as a distinct people in Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 35 through 37. If that's true, they must be identifiable somewhere on earth today. My study presents 8 criteria derived from scripture and tests them against peer-reviewed genetic research, ancient DNA, historical primary sources, and comparative linguistics. One population satisfies all 8 simultaneously. Haplogroup R populations of Europe and their diaspora. My 8 criteria are, this is a quick list, the peculiarity of the Israelites. Haplogroup R, which is the sole haplogroup that I argue as being Israelites, not haplogroup I. So not all Europeans. And if Aiden tries to make that claim, that is not the claim of the study. It is a specific paternal haplogroup. Haplogroup R bodies are at Israelite sites and are classified.
What is he going to say? Irish? I've heard other people say it's only Irish.
By researchers. Yet strontium isotope analysis confirms they were born locally in the lands of Canaan, which Aiden failed to address in his study. They were peculiar from the Canaanites and born locally. That's exactly what the Bible says about the Israelites. Haplogroup R pulses in and out of the Levant. They appear at Levantine sites between 1500 and 1200 BC. And this is based on the bodies we found, the remains we found. And their population numbers peak at 1000 BC, which is the Davidic kingdom. Then it fades after the Assyrian Babylonian exiles. And 3 independent studies document this. Argonaut Tamir 2020, Feldman 2019, and Haber 2020. So if Aiden tries to say I have no studies that support anything I'm saying, it's nonsense. I have over 100 citations in the study. Levite preservation. Ashkenazi Levites carry R1A-M582, descending from R1A M417, the haplogroup of sample I2189 buried at Megiddo during the conquest era. It's an unbroken biological line to 300,000 living Levites today. And Baer et al. 2003, 2017, and Ruzzi et al. 2013 all confirm that this is a genuine Israelite line that has its founding in Israel in the time of the Joshua and Judges period.
Oh my God, dude. Does this guy think he's a priest? Does he think he's a Levite priest? I bet you he does. Amalek says, I hate these people. Nate Live is feasing. I know, dude.
That are prophesied to come over the Israelites, medieval Northern and Western Europe have been the worldwide epicenter of these diseases, specifically leprosy and tuberculosis, which was found in the first century Jerusalem tomb. This is not the Shroud of Turin. This is called the Tomb of the Shroud. So the first century Jerusalem Tomb of the Shroud carried both diseases as well as maternal haplogroups that all point to Europe. Every one of them, H, V, T, and W. And H, for example.
Hold on. He's saying there's prophecies of plagues, so that's why Europe had diseases. Dude, everybody's got diseases all over the world. What are you talking about? Oh, we're cursed by Hashem. The true Israelites are cursed by Hashem to have diseases. You know we're really chosen because we got the diseases. Like, oh, what are we doing? So deep in the closet? Yeah, I was maybe wondering that too.
In Basque Country, Spain, and in Wales in the British Isles. Some of the studies, Matheson, 2009. My fifth criteria is dairy tolerance. People take this for granted, but Northwestern Europeans carry 90 to 95% lactase persistence, highest on earth, specifically cow dairy, okay? And this is what the Israelites are drinking in the scriptures. It's consistent with the covenant people whose promised land flows with milk and honey. It's consistent with Solomon stating that he drinks milk from the flock and honey as well. The rest of the world is 25% or less lactase persistence. So Europeans stand out in that regard. Sixth criteria is prophetic amnesia. Haplogroup.
Dude. White Northwestern European people that have been there for tens of thousands of years, we were drinking all the milk. We were surviving off the livestock and their milk and cheeses. Cheese and butters. We was milk drinkers and shit. I remember looking into this one time too, and it was like the ancient Israel, because it's called the land of milk and honey, but they're like, people didn't really drink that much milk. They processed it into different other things. Dude, that's crazy.
Our populations have entirely forgotten any Levantine connection.
Yeah, we were eating pork too, exactly, Jack Stone. Yeah, we were eating pork, lots of pork. Love pork.
Fulfilling Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 6, fragments of cultural memory persist in legal system and early church practice, as well as...
You know what? Also, Japan has like the average, like they live to be the oldest in Japan, and they eat tons of pork, tons of meat and tons of pork.
Language. I'm sure that Aiden is familiar with this, but there are ties between Gaelic and Celtic languages and the Semitic Afro-Asiatic languages. If he wants, I see him shaking his head. If he denies it, we'll challenge him on that. The apostolic visitation. 4 independent sources across a millennium confirm early apostolic contact with the British Isles. This is critical because Jesus said for the apostles to specifically go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Tertullian, who is circa 197,
dude.
AD.
Hold on. You're trying to say that apostles went to Northwestern Europe? Come on, dude. Get real.
Eusebius 314, Gildas, which was a monk, British monk, in 540, and the Declaration of Arbroath in 1320. These all indicate that the apostles came very early, and in fact, it's Gildas that makes the case that they came during the...
Is that why they were all still pagan up there and didn't know anything about the Torah or Jesus or anything? Or it wouldn't be Jesus back then. They didn't know anything about the Torah or Judaism at all, and they weren't circumcising, and they were eating pork. Come on.
Tiberius Caesar prior to the establishment of Roman occupation. Not that Romans had never been there, but there was no Roman occupation, and there certainly wasn't a Romanized church. And then the eighth criteria, north and ends of the earth, is where the Israelites are prophesied to be. Haplogroup R dominates every region the prophets described for Israel's last days. Europe, Russia, and the colonial world, including South America, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand, all possess and are dominated by haplogroup R, which is the haplogroup that I'm arguing for.
Oh, prophecy now too. So now you have to believe prophecy is real to think that whites are the real Israelites. Yeah, the people that wrote those prophecies didn't even know about New Zealand and South America and all of these places. This is so.
Also, the study
So
PCA chart from Lezeride
trash.
published in Nature, and it shows 12 genetically distinct but closely related European populations clustering together, and the Ashkenazi positioned outside the European circle, which is exactly where we would expect the Edomites to be as a result of Canaanite admixture in their autosomal DNA. My opponent mentions this chart in his article. He never directly addresses it. This is not a Christian study. This is a secular study revealing 12 genetic pools among the Europeans. My opponent's central claim is that haplogroup R arrived in Europe via the Bell Breakers 2450 BC before Abraham left Ur. That's fine. That's his argument. The date rests entirely on radiocarbon calibration, a method with documented peer-reviewed limitations that compound with age, which I intend to press Aidan on throughout this debate. I will address this directly. Aidan, I again appreciate your responses, and it's nothing personal. However, I do not believe that you addressed my study adequately, and I'm looking forward to correcting the assumptions that you made. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that. We're now going to be jumping into a 10-minute response from Aidan, and then after that segment, we're going to be allotting 5 minutes per each of the 8 criteria. So 10 minutes for the floor for you, Aidan, beginning now.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Rich will say that he's specifically arguing that haplogroup R is the ancient Israelites, but then he'll go on at the very end. He mentioned that PCA chart, which shows 12 distinct tribes, which he's obviously insinuating that these are the lost tribes of Israel, not just ones that are descended from haplogroup R, because not all of those distinct European groups descend from haplogroup R. So he is kind of insinuating that people who are associated with Europe are the lost tribes of Israel. He'll probably narrow that down into British Israelism or maybe like the Spartans or something. But he does, just to be fair, Rich, you are making the claim that haplogroup I specifically represents some sort of non-Hebrew European group of people. As that is something that you do mention, but with that PCA chart, you are insinuating that all of those 12 tribes or the lost tribes are represented by this PCA chart, but we'll get into the PCA stuff later. And just to be clear, I'm arguing from the well-established field of archaeogenetics, comparative mythology, Indo-European or European linguistics. These are studies that include thousands and thousands of papers and hundreds of scholars. The papers that Rich is citing from directly are made up, they're written by multiple different scholars. It's not just like one guy or a couple guys, it's many of them. And then it gets peer reviewed, oftentimes by scholars of different papers. It's a very in-depth field filled with a lot of, very, very careful science. And Rich isn't being careful. He'll pick and choose and kind of go with what he wants, especially based off of the Bible. Because if the Bible's insinuating something, then he has to find something in science that backs that up, even if the papers themselves aren't actually saying that. Like for example, he mentioned this these outliers, these R1A outliers. Those are directly associated with the Philistines in that paper. They're not associated with Israelites, and those haplogroups remained. Some of them are even around today. They didn't just completely disappear, and they never pulsed into and pulsed out of. They're directly related to the Bronze Age collapse. Most scholars relate them to the Pelasgians, the ancient, Hellenic peoples. And most scholars also are very keen to be careful about what they call downstream subclade research. And so a lot of the claims that Rich is making are all based on a very faulty view of haplogroups. Basically, if you can find R1A in Israel and you can find R1A in Europe, they must be the same people. Well, that's not the case. And that's because haplogroup R, haplogroup R1B, R1A, haplogroups I and J, these are incredibly ancient haplogroups. And Rich will just say, no, they're not, because you can't trust radiocarbon dating. First off, all of the limitations of radiocarbon dating can be accurately identified, and there's already been peer-reviewed studies. You mentioned these. There have been peer-reviewed studies on the limitations of these. Well, there's also studies on how you can, work around these, or if specifically not work around them, but to verify them using other things. So, like for example, genetic data itself can be dated without radiocarbon dating. They can do this by looking at the descending, I don't know the exact terminology, but they can do it by looking at the ascending and descending lines. They can tell based off of your genetics roughly how many generations you might have had before you. And of course, the further back you go, the hazier it gets. But I'm not really interested in arguing arguing about human origins or something. I don't think science can prove that. Like the Frojax brothers, I have some questions with out of Africa, and I'm sure that Rich also has some, issues with it. So I'm not necessarily arguing that we can go back, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years, but we can definitely be quite certain when it's, 40,000 years, even 100,000 years. I'm quite certain that that's true, and that's because of the vast amount of data that we have on hand for any of these things. And so when it comes to these haplogroups, we know for a fact that these haplogroups are way more ancient than what Rich is insinuating. They don't line up with the biblical narrative whatsoever. There's a reason why you can find R1A associated with Philistines who had settled into Israel and got absorbed into the Israelite population. That's something that we can very clearly understand and explain. Just to give some background for the audience, the oldest sample with haplogroup R is from the 24,000-year-old Paleolithic, that's the early Stone Age, Malta boy from Siberia. The oldest sample with R1b is from the 14,000-year-old Epigravidian Villabruna sample, a Western hunter-gatherer. All Europeans today carry some level of Western hunter-gatherer DNA. And the oldest sample with R1a is from the 12,000-year-old Peshenitsa burial in Russia of a Mesolithic hunter-gatherer. These dates are not just affirmed through one or two radiocarbon dating studies, they're affirmed through a myriad of them, largely not just with the actual skulls and skeletons themselves, but with the tools that they use, and very rare, but sometimes clothing. We do get some bits of clothing at times. And so there's many different ways that we can cross-examine and compare to try to get accurate datings. And again, the methodology for these things are very, very concise, and they know the limitations. It's not like people who disbelieve in radiocarbon dating are bringing up something fascinating. Usually it's the scientists themselves who are pointing out the limitations. But because lay people don't understand any of this, they just take those and run with them. So haplogroup IJ diverged into I and J 43,000 years ago and are related to very archaic hunter-gatherers of the Stone Age. Haplogroup I largely went into Europe and became associated with Epigravidians. These are Stone Age Europeans. We find their sites all over Western Europe, and other related populations as seen with the samples from Pugliese Cave in Italy. On the other hand, J stayed in the Caucasus and Anatolia and became foundational for many Middle Eastern lines. You can find haplogroup J both in Europe and in the Middle East. That does not denote that this is one tribe or another. This is a very, very ancient haplogroup that came into these places tens of thousands of years ago, totally unrelated with peoples written down in modern history texts or even ancient history texts. How do we know if one tribe is related to another or if one man's related to another? It's through downstream subclade research. And this is why haplogroups end up having like R1b, M25 or something, or L22. That's a downstream subclade. And every generation actually adds to that. And so, like, for example, I'm I2A, and I come from I2A L22, which is associated with the Norse Gaels. Well, if I had a son and my son had my brother had a son, that actually is something that they would be able to prove based off of these downstream subclade studies. And hey, guess what? When they do these studies on the ancient Levant, they do not find that these people are related to Europeans. They find that they're related to other Semites, which is what they cite in their own studies. So I just think that a lot of what Rich is saying is kind of, it's something that laymen do. I did this when I was first looking into genetic studies. I did not understand the complexity of it all. And I think I'm kind of probably nearing my time, so I'll bring up the PCA stuff as a final note. You can vector PCA charts in a number of ways. I've got 3 of them pulled up. I don't know if I can do screen shares, but maybe I'll do that in a little bit. But these PCA charts, they show genetic relation or distance, and you can actually, there's a 3D model that I saw that was super complex. It was like rotating around, and it showed people on one vector going this way, another vector going this way, and then it showed relation to all the peoples of the earth. There's way more than just 12 distinct groups of Europeans. Depending on how you vector it, there could be 3, there could be 30. Every ethnic group could be shown as being distinct. Different regions within an ethnic group could be shown as being distinct. PCA charts can be incredibly narrow and looking really, really closely at just one nation and show all the distinctions between different towns and families and clans, or they can be really broad and show how closely related Europeans are to Middle Easterners and so on. There's a reason why Ashkenazi Jews plot right in between Europe and the Levant. And hey, guess what? It's really surprising. It's because they've mixed with both groups. Now, most of their genetics can be traced directly back to the Levant, which there's a myriad of studies on this. So I don't really know why the Christian identitarian people will try to. Yeah, I don't know why they'll try to bring up genetic studies when there's genetic studies on Jews, Sephardics, Mizrahis, Ashkenazis, and they all carry genes that go back to some Semitic Levantine group. So that's all I got now.
All right, we'll now be jumping into 5 minutes for each of the 8 criteria. Beginning now, 5 minutes for Rich Tidwell. Begin.
Okay, so Aiden's primary point is he is basing his view on the fact that carbon-14 dates can be trusted. The problem with this is that int-cal calibration degrades with depth. So int-cal 20 uses tree rings called dendrochronology, coral, marine sediments to reconstruct past C14 levels. The tree rings can extend back allegedly to 14,000 years with reasonable confidence. Beyond that, calibration relies on marine and other error ranges and assumptions. We know that there are offsets because of the Levantine offset, because of the reservoir effect, but the primary issue is the magnetic field problem. Carbon-14 is produced by cosmic rays hitting atmospheric nitrogen. Earth's magnetic field modulates cosmic radiation. Paleomagnetic data confirms the field was varied significantly. A stronger magnetic field in the past would suppress C14 production, making organisms from that era appear far older than they actually are, potentially by thousands of years. This is a serious technical objection to deep prehistory radiocarbon dates. It affects all the migration data. It affects everything. So the more thousands of years you go back, the less accurate it is. And so it's important that we address the fact that I am challenging those C14 dates. And also to challenge something he said, genetic data does use C14 dates to determine the timeline for mutations, because when those bones are...
Is this autistic and technical enough for you guys? Amalek says, I will carbon date my skull with your balls, with my balls. That's gross, dude. He nailed it. He's like, yeah, Ashkenazis are right there in the middle between Europeans and Semites because they're mixed of the two. What the hell are you talking about? I thought it was over at that moment. That's all he had to say.
Found, they date them. So that helps us to understand when the mutation is. However, again, that can be skewed by not knowing how much carbon-14 is in the air or how heavy the cosmic radiation was. Okay, so actually point one, the criterion one, peculiar from the Canaanites. His objection is that our haplogroups in the Levant just reflect a mixed region. Aegean traders and what have you. In his study, if you haven't read it, you should read both of our studies. My response is he never mentions strontium isotope analysis, and he didn't just now in his rebuttals. SIA confirms that these are individuals that I'm arguing were born locally in Canaan. Aiden, you have to address this. Not transient foreigners, not from somewhere else. They weren't just coming in on a ship. They're born there, and their SIA confirms it. They're genetically distinct. They never assimilated across multiple generations. They are there in great numbers during the Davidic kingdom. They do pulse in. They do exit. Regardless of what you say, that's what the studies say. Scripture calls them a peculiar people in Deuteronomy 14:2, and you are correct that I am basing my assessment of the studies on Scripture itself. And my point is the science is actually corroborating and converging together to prove the Scriptures are true. A rebuttal that ignores the central evidence is not a rebuttal, Aiden. You have to address this from...
The Bible says that we'll be a peculiar people. You don't think Jews are peculiar? Europeans are peculiar. Come on, dude. That's your argument. The Bible says this, and we're totally like that. Okay, you sound like the Black Hebrew Israelites. They have 100 arguments like that. Yeah, this white Hebrew Israelite is even more cringe than the Black Hebrew Israelites. And they're all wannabe Jews. It's pathetic.
Isotope analysis and the fact that C14 dating cannot be trusted the further back we go. Thank you.
All right. 5 minutes for Aiden. Please begin.
Yeah, so scholars already know the problems that come with the inaccurate, sometimes dating of carbon based off of the things that you said. That's something that they identified themselves. That's why we know about this. It wasn't a layman who found this. It was scholars who were finding inconsistencies in their dating. And they've already got methodology to work around it and mostly to corroborate it with other ways that we can date things. Again, another thing that you said that was interesting is the isotopes. Well, I actually did address that. It was just one sentence because it doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why. It doesn't matter if those samples were born in the Levant. That doesn't mean that that's where their haplogroups, specifically their haplogroups are associated with Pelasgians or the Philistines. They're not associated with the Israelites, and so that's why they are considered outliers relative to the local population, who are these Semitic Canaanites and Israelites, who are related to each other. Their languages are related, their mythologies are related, their genetics are related. Genetic studies that you're citing from actually point these things out. And another point that I should bring up with this is if let's say that a Bronze Age Pelasgian or Greek guy, an Aegean, if let's say he comes in and he mixes with the founding people and his haplogroup stays the dominant haplogroup throughout the Philistines, and all of his descendants are going to be born there. So the isotope data, which is something that they use, like it's a way that you can test to see where people had been born or not, which regions they'd grown up in, really is what they're getting at. And yeah, most of those samples, those outlier samples, they all did grow up in the Levant. That doesn't mean that they're Israelites. That's not what the study is saying. If the study found the ones that you're citing from about the Philistine samples, if that study had said or had found, oh, these are Israelites, they would have said that. They would have pointed that out. And also, if they had found that these people are related to like the Scots or the Irish or the Basque or anyone, they would have pointed that out too. It would have been obvious as day to these people. So it just again, it's a little dubious of evidence. And yeah, I am going to just kind of ignore the biblical stuff because it's not relevant to genetic studies and archaeological studies and the historical narrative. It's just myth, which doesn't mean fake. It's just not real history. But yeah, I think that the other part about this criteria that I have a problem with is the other issues of what he was saying. Like that somehow these haplogroups denote pure tribes. That's not what haplogroup data does. You can find haplogroups across a wide swath of populations. Just because you found R1, just because the scholars found R1A in the Levant, does not mean that the Israelites are R1A. That's not what they found at all. And that also doesn't mean that somehow we're related to Israelites. That's just not how haplogroup studies work. That's all I've got.
Cool. All right. We can move to 5 minutes for Rich discussing criteria 2. Whenever you're ready, please begin.
Okay, so repeatedly Aidan's making the case that, doesn't matter. He'll use this dismissive attitude. The problem is he's brought up the Philistines twice now. The Philistines are descendants of Ham, scripturally, and they are haplogroup E, not R. So when R pulses into Ashkelon, which is a Philistine city, and I hope you familiarize yourself with this. Wait. J and E are present in Ashkelon.
We just looked this up the other day. Philistines came from a Greek island. They were Europeans. They didn't come from Ham. Ham is supposedly black. And again, we just said, all right, dude, your Bible arguments are bullshit. Now he's like, but it came from Ham, just like Genesis and Noah's Ark. It's just like, God, dude, you got Bible brain. You're hypnotized under the Jewish spell of this fake history, dude. That's your problem.
During and after the haplogroup R pulse. The haplogroup R pulse fits within the Joshua and Judges period after 1446 BC Exodus. So Philistines are not haplogroup R. That's a false statement. You're also stating that the scientists would have pointed out, that haplogroup R are the Israelites if that was the truth. This just isn't true. Again, they're stating which haplogroups are in the area, not necessarily who those haplogroups are. And going back, this is a later criteria, but Ashkenazi Levites are haplogroup R1A, and the studies do validate the fact that haplogroup R is an Israelite haplogroup in those circumstances. My argument is that J and E are the Edomites, which historically, regardless of the Bible, converted to Judaism about 125 years prior to to Christ's birth and to the first century. So scripture and science also aligning is real history. So you can't dismiss the book. That just shows a cognitive bias against the book. You can't dismiss the book because you don't want it to be true. When it states historical facts, they are historical facts. It doesn't matter that they're in the Bible. They are true. It is real history. And then paternal.
The Bible's real history. Come on, dude. The Bible is so fake. The Bible is so incredibly made up and fake. You just have a cognitive bias. Yeah, you got the Bible brain cognitive bias. You got the cognitive dissonance and the confirmation bias.
Haplogroups, and you brought up R1A, which is what's associated with the Levites. Paternal haplogroups are traceable to a father, hence the term paternal. And my argument is that that father is Jacob, based on the placement of haplogroup R in the Levant at the right time and their migration into Europe, displacing haplogroup I later on. Criterion 2, they pulse.
We was Jacob. We was Yaakov. We was Jacob. They're Esau.
Out of the Levant. His objection is R1B is in Western Europe very early. I'm arguing against that because of C14 dating issues. My response, Criterion 2 makes no claim about how Western Europeans got R1B. The claim is about a genetics pulse in and out of the Levant during the biblical timeline. So you could say, well, there's R somewhere else as well. Okay.
Jack Stone says R1A and R1B in Europe trace back to steppe migrations 3000 BCE, long before any Exodus or 12 scattering of the 12 tribes. Yep. Sounds about right.
We can debate that out, I guess, but my primary argument is that this group pulses in and out of the Levant at exactly the right time and has its population level impact during the Davidic kingdom, which is exactly what the Bible records the Israelites did. The independent studies document it. He doesn't engage the studies. So for example, on Feldman et al., the paper shows European-related ancestry declining by Iron Age 2, whether explained as Philistine assimilation, which is his read, or Israelite departure, which is my read. The signal's identical, same data, different explanation. His is a theological objection, not a genetic one. Again, don't be deceived by Aidan. He has a bias against Scripture. So he's going at this theologically, even though he's claiming to be only scientific. I'm being honest that I have a religious motivation, and I am aligning science with what I believe to prove and corroborate what the Scriptures state. Again, C14, the absolute dates assigned to this pulse are calibration dependent. The relative signal appearance and disappearance is not. So we can argue C14 exact precise dates. They're way more accurate during the Levantine period. I think Aiden would agree. And as a result, haplogroup is not there. Haplogroup R is not there. J and E is there. And then R pulses in, has a peak during the Davidic kingdom, and then pulses out because of the
Davidic kingdom.
That's it. Thanks, guys.
All right, 5 minutes for Aiden. Please begin.
Well, he did.
This guy looks like he could be from the Middle East. I don't get a white Scandinavian Northwestern European vibe to him. He looks a little swarthy.
Beginning responding to the last 5 minutes, which I'm not going to be able to get into. But I found that to be interesting because there was a lot of things that you said that I would have liked to have responded to, but I'm just going to respond to your second criteria. So specifically, the rise of haplogroups R in Europe, it does predate the rise of haplogroup R in the Levant. You can doubt those dates, but it's not just genetic samples, it's massive amounts of archaeological cultures, which are not mentioned in the Bible, by the way. There's a lot of archaeological cultures associated, not just with haplogroup.
That's what I just said. The R1A and B came long before any biblical stuff would have been happening.
European, some non-Hebrew European, and also haplogroup R, R1A, R1B. I think, as I said before, R1B, the oldest sample of R is from 2,004-year-old Paleolithic Malta-boy from Siberia. The oldest sample with R1B is the 14,000-year-old Epigravettian Villabruna sample, the Western hunter-gatherers. That's a long time before Israel. So even if there was a pulse of R1B or R1A or any haplogroup that you're trying to associate with the Europeans specifically, even if that pulsed into Europe, into Israel, that doesn't mean that that's the specific subclade that all Europeans are descending from. So again, we know the subclades of Europeans who carry R1B, R1A, and they do not come from the subclades of Israel. They're totally different, divergent lines. And I do actually address all of this in my response to you. I'm directly citing from the same sources that you are citing from, and they don't say the things that you say. You think that maybe these scholars would have walked away thinking, that we were the true Israelites, but that's not at all what they think. So I don't know why you are citing from them in the first place. And again, also with the whole
because they're cherry picking and spinning to prove the Bible and fulfill their desire, their fantasy to be a true Israelite. That's why he's doing it. Obviously,
Philistines are, got absorbed into Israel. No, that's what the study found, according to the autosomal DNA. The haplogroups might have diminished, but you can still find R1A in the Levant after the fall of the Philistines. You can find it associated with the Hittites, who also carried R1A. You can find it associated with some Egyptian eras, who also carried faint amounts. You can find it with the Assyrians, who also carried faint amounts. And again, you can find it with the later Levites, who left at a later time. And so that doesn't mean anything, ultimately. Haplogroup data is not enough to prove genetic relation or even genetic origin. Now, if you go back far enough in time, like when the first sample of R1A is found, yes, you can be able to trace the subclades and you can prove relation and descent to that subclade. But that's thousands of years ago. There's tons and tons of tribes in between that ancient site and the sites that you're attempting to associate with them. And again, that just ignores a vast amount of European history that, like a lot of tribes and a lot of peoples with totally different haplogroups, you're just ignoring all of those because you are focusing just on this R1A, R1B, that's the true Israelites. Well, they don't even find significant amounts of R1B in these studies. They're mostly focusing on R1A. And you would probably say that the R1Bs are Israelites, I would imagine. And so I just don't think that it's a good enough piece of evidence. And again, the pulsing into and exiting out of, this is the point that I'm trying to make. It's not relevant because that's not what the studies are finding. That might be what the Bible is insinuating, but that's not what the studies are finding. They would affirm those things. Instead, you find that the Philistines, who are related to Aegean peoples, you can say, well, the Bible says they come from Ham. Okay, cool. That's not the actual genetic and archaeological history of these.
That's what I just said.
Are a mixture of Hellenic, well, not Hellenic, but they're a mixture of Aegean peoples and Semite Levantine peoples. And they do get absorbed into the population. And their haplogroups do remain in small numbers, so it's really not relevant. Now, I would like for the next one for us to focus on each criteria so that we're not going back and forth right now. We can do that later.
Exactly. Philistines weren't blacks from Ham, and Noah's Ark ain't real. Wrecked. He's getting wrecked. This guy's cooking him. He knows his European DNA studies. Former CI probably researched his way out of it. Didn't get stuck with the Bible brain cope.
Yes, on that note, after we go through each of the criteria and also the PCA maps, if you guys want to get into that, we can do a back and forth where you guys can kind of just let loose and address all these different issues. So we're going to do 5 minutes now for criteria 3 for Mr. Tidwell. Please begin.
Okay. So again, even for my other criteria, again, Aiden's basis is that these older samples of haplogroup R are far before, the story of Israel. And I think he would agree that's his primary argument by tens of thousands of years, by the way. So these bodies that he's citing are very old. The problem with that statement is there's several issues. 3700 BC is actually, which it marks the early dynastic period of Sumer and some of the earliest cities, Uruk, Ur, and Eridu, okay? There's a study called Spatializing 6,000 Years of Global Urbanization from 37 BC to AD 2000. This study indicates that the earliest we have confirmed cities is 3700 BC.
Wait, dude. I thought this guy didn't believe in radiocarbon dating. It's all flawed. You can't trust it, and that's just something they say to try to debunk the shroud. Now you're citing them all when it's convenient for you to try to claim that they're saying something. Funny how that works.
Okay. That again compresses our timeline on cities and people living in groups together. The radiocarbon dating that he continues to bring up, it's not as certain as he's presenting, especially the older the dating gets. So haplogroup R fitting the Israelite signal makes sense when you understand these problems with carbon-14. He's presenting it like there's, just a consensus that C14 is trustworthy at 8,000 years, and it's not. Also, he hasn't addressed the fact that there.
Yeah, it's dating. The radiocarbon dating's fake when it disproves Christianity, but real when it affirms it, or when they claim it affirms it, because it doesn't actually affirm it. How come Europeans speak a Indo-European language group, language family, and the Jews have a Semitic, Afro-Asiatic Semitic language? That should tell you everything you need to know right there. You think a bunch of true Israelites went up to Europe and just all forgot who they were and stopped circumcising and lost their Torah and forgot who they were and where they came from and just nothing like that? Come on.
Was a flood, not just recorded in the Bible, but a worldwide flood that buried a massive pre-flood biosphere and slashed the C12 and C14.
Oh, dude, flood. It's only messed up because the flood changed it. Because the flood's just not in the Bible. It definitely, everybody knows the flood really happened all over the world. Come on.
Baseline. And it coincided or triggered a magnetic field change that altered C14 production. So that released vast old carbon from rock, sediment, and volcanic activity into water and air. The InCal curve, which he's depending on, is built entirely from post-event proxies. It cannot detect a discontinuity. It never sampled. So a single pre-flood organism could read as 8,000 BC or far older while actually dating to within the young Earth window and also dating haplogroup R to being much more recent than what Aiden is claiming. Okay. So for the criteria, the Levite genetic preservation is criterion 3, which we've already brought them up some. He concedes in his study that the Ashkenazi Levite R1A finding is real and genuinely interesting. In other words, that they are genuine Israelites. The time to most recent common ancestor measures when living carriers last shared a common ancestor, not when the lineage originated. An endogamous priestly caste passing through a diaspora bottleneck compresses that timeline regardless of actual antiquity. So
hey!
M14_blanket sent $20 snake and sparkler money.
Thank you. Yeah, July 4th. Man, I haven't done snakes since I was a little kid. I used to love those and the sparklers. Fireworks are banned in Southern California, so I haven't had fireworks since I was a kid.
582.
But I appreciate that.
Brought up, he seems to understand subclades, establishes descent, and the time to most recent common ancestor doesn't erase it. So his refutation confirms my thesis. I argue the Levites are the authentic Israelite remnant within modern Judaism. The non-Levite Ashkenazi carry predominantly J and E haplogroups, which existed before, during, and after the haplogroup R pulse in the Levant. And yet we have these 300,000 or so Ashkenazi Levites carrying the R1A signature. And they were buried, to address his R1B claim, they were buried with R1B as well. So there's R1A and R1B both at Megiddo and these Israelite burial sites. He never distinguishes Levite from non-Levite genetics because it would expose the precision of my argument.
1 minute.
So the Ashkenazi are J and E. I am claiming that the Levites, due to endogamy, maintained the original signature, while the converts, who were haplogroups J and E, simply became Jews by conversion, and that's corroborated by the fact that the Idumeans were converted by the Hasmonean dynasty in 125 BC by force and became part of Judaism from that point forward, but were not considered real Jews because they weren't paternal descendants of Jacob. Thank you.
All right, thank you. 5 minutes for Aiden, please begin.
Yeah, so I did address all of this in my criteria, and it is interesting, largely because of this founder effect, and the bottleneck that you brought up. That's a pretty rare event to happen in genetic science, and it's really easy for us to use.
10 subscriptions on Rumble.
10 subscriptions. That sounds like a lot. Thank you, dude. I like the name Valhalla or Bust too. That's the new motto I'm gonna live by.
Those to then associate different living populations with ancient populations, with which, again, why would we even associate any of these groups together? It's because of the studies and data that these people are pulling out, both with the genetics and with radiocarbon dating. So I mean, like, you're citing from studies where they use radiocarbon dating often, and that's not the only way. They corroborate that with many other things. As I said, like, they can look at your genetics and tell, based off of your genetics, how many generations you might have had and how that relates to different things. So again, the whole R1A haplogroup thing with Ashkenazi Levites, yeah, so that actually undersells your argument, Rich, and I'll explain to you why. So if R1A, specifically this M582, if that can be found in ancient Israel and it's found with modern Jews, that's showing that modern Jews are descended from those people. And they do the same thing with other haplogroup studies. You can find the same haplogroups carried by modern Jews found in ancient Israel, sometimes with Canaanites, sometimes with Philistines, sometimes with Israelites, and they are the exact same subclades. They're the same relation. So even though R1A is something that you can find all over different European populations, that does not mean that it's the founder subclade or founder haplogroup for all of these other Europeans that you're trying to associate with these Levites. Levites, yeah, Ashkenazi Levites who carry R1A, yeah, they come from the Levant. That's what the studies are proving. Same with these other haplogroups. Those specific haplogroups of J and sometimes G and E, and there's other ones as well that you can find with the Semites. It's the subclade specifically. It's the downstream subclade studies on those that are important. And all of them, whether it's Mizrahi Jew, Sephardic Jew, like, I got a list of genetic studies that I can send you after this, and I'm sure that you'll be interested in going through it to to build your worldview more. I don't expect to change your opinion, but I'm trying to explain something to you because I was confused about haplogroups for a long time as well. These haplogroups, they require downstream subclade research to be able to prove direct relation. This is why they know that a R1A sample found in the Levant is traceable to modern-day Ashkenazi Levites. That proves that modern-day Ashkenazi Levites are indeed Israelites. They're not Edomites or anything like that. But that also doesn't disprove that any J or E or G haplogroups are somehow Edomites or something. No, because you can find the exact same samples living in the exact same places, oftentimes in the same archaeological context. That's why they call it archaeogenetics. It's not just genetic studies, it's also archaeological studies. The places where they find these things, like specifically that one at
Dude, Edomites and Judeans would have been like shared a bunch of DNA even before they were known as separate people, right? They lived right next door to one another. So they're going to have genetic similarities even before.
and at Megiddo. They associate that with the Philistines, not just because of the genetics and the autosomal, but because of the archaeological context. They can also do this with, like, Egyptians and Hittites in the area. I was just reading a Hittite study where that's the entire focus was even though the genetics at this site was just like all these other Levantine peoples, they knew that it was a Hittite location based off of the archaeology. But you would probably question some of the dating on that because of the radiocarbon. And yeah, this is a really interesting criteria. I do find this one to be interesting. I mean, because of this whole, founder effect and the way that their genetics bottleneck, so that 52% of them carry the exact same haplogroup with almost the exact same downstream subclades. That's pretty interesting. But again, that just shows that they come from that region. That doesn't mean that they're somehow distinct from these other groups. They're autosomal. They still map on PCA charts next to other Ashkenazi Jews. They don't map with us. They're not somehow some, Levite remnant that got caught up with these Edomites, because what's the other 52% of them, or 58? What's the other 58? Well, it's not R1A, and they plot right with those people who sometimes carry J and E. And hey, guess what? You can find Europeans with J and E haplogroup. That doesn't mean anything ultimately. It's autosomal DNA. It's archaeology.
1 minute.
And, things that we'll get into later, like linguistics and stuff.
All right, thank you. That was criteria 3 or 4. I just want to make sure we're keeping track here.
3.
That was 3.
All right. Rich, whenever you're ready, we can jump into criteria 4, sir. 5 minutes.
Okay. So criterion 4 is leprosy and tuberculosis. This is an important one because it's on the basis of the Tomb of the Shroud, which was located in Jerusalem and was excavated, and it's from the 1st century, so it's from the right time period. I will mention a side note. There was a male buried in this tomb with hair. They did not give us the paternal haplogroup, which is bizarre. I get that there are some scientific explanations for it. However, it is bizarre. They did give us the maternal, and they did give us the diseases of the bodies. The diseases of the bodies are, of course, tuberculosis and leprosy, which we mentioned earlier.
Loki_redneck mullet sent $0 on Thursday shekels. Thor love the late night streams as.
Thank you, Loki. Loki almost supports every single show. Appreciate you, bro. It means a lot.
Those did peak, and this is outlined in my study. Those did peak in medieval times in Europe, and then tuberculosis, both Europe and the United States. So the diseases being found in Jerusalem are peaking in a specific population on Earth, again, pointing towards Europe. And as I'm arguing, haplogroup R. Now, all we got was maternal DNA for the ladies, which was H, V, T, and W. Okay. And again, I mentioned this earlier at the beginning, haplogroup H peaks in Wales. It's the highest on Earth in Wales. It's also high in Basque Country, Spain. VT and W also are in Europe and Central Asia. They all peak in those places. That's significant because that means that the group that carries that, who clustered in Jerusalem, then clustered over in European areas. That means that those two groups moved from one place to another. And back to the previous criterion, the Levites did the same thing. That bottleneck that he admits is pretty important actually shows that they originated in Levant and then moved to Europe before coming back because of the Balfour Declaration in the 1948 war. So the migration patterns of the haplogroup R and the maternal haplogroups is...
Whoa. Hold on. Did he just claim that the Israelites were returning to Israel with the true Israelite Englishman, British from Wales, returned to the Holy Land and fulfilled prophecy with the Balfour Declaration? You gotta be kidding me, dude. This guy is a clown. What an unserious person.
Specific haplogroup, paternally, but also maternally, and also the diseases are...
So he loves the Balfour Declaration. He thinks the Balfour Declaration is the based Israelites going back to the Holy Land. Is that what he thinks? Right, that's a crazy take.
Occurring at the highest levels in those exact same regions. To address one more thing that he had said that none of the studies indicate that haplogroup R was pulsing. That's essentially my entire argument, is that haplogroup R meets all of these criteria that the biblical record sets forth. Haber et al. In 2020, their study in 2020, quote, says this, quote, during the Iron Age, 1000 BC, people with Anatolian and Southeast European ancestry admixed with people in the Near East. And then it says more later in the study. This is another quote. Quote, we found that significant genetic changes that were marked by an increase in Eurasian ancestry related to ancient Europeans and ancient Central Asians occurred after the Bronze Age and starting from the Iron Age circa 1000 BC. All of my arguments are hinging on that notion that there was a baseline peoples, which was haplogroups J and E. This R pulses in the same way the Bible says they do. They carry the diseases, they exit at the same time, and we have tombs in Jerusalem pointing to the exact same places where haplogroup R resides. Those women are in Wales and in Basque Country, and those people are the highest carriers of leprosy and tuberculosis. This is significant. All of these criteria together are weaving a picture that the Bible first painted. There's a peculiar group that shows up in the Levant and leaves, and time again, it is haplogroup R, and this criterion proves it as well. Thank you.
Did I ever say if my wife was Christian, you think I'd be married to a Christian, dude? Is that what you think of me? You think I'd be cucked by Jesus with my wife? That's hilarious. No, my wife was raised sort of going to church, so a little bit Christian at times with her family, but by the time I met her, she didn't believe any of it. Dude, could you imagine if my wife was a secret Christian and the whole reason I hate Jesus so much is because I got cucked by Jesus? I got put in the cuck chair by Jesus with my wife. That would be hilarious. Did I green pill her? I didn't have to. She already got it.
All right, 5 minutes for Aiden.
Yeah, so the studies that he's citing from are specifically...
We should start that rumor. That might be a funny rumor to like plant. My wife's a Christian, and that's why I hate Jesus so much. That's the real reason. Not because I'm secretly Jewish. It's because my wife loves Jesus more than me. That's funny. Like a supervillain origin story.
Like in this part of the criteria, he's citing from.
I'm jealous of
again,
Jesus.
these
My wife likes Jesus more than she loves me. I'm jealous. That's why I hate him.
diseases in Western Europe. They don't mention haplogroup H. He's connecting a tomb, and he's connecting it with these diseases because you can find these diseases in that tomb, and he's associating this with biblical prophecy. None of that proves at all what he's trying to say. This is like really shaky evidence. Haplogroup H, it originates after the last glacial maximum, roughly 15,000 years ago. Again, this is more than just carbon dating. There's a whole bunch of dating that they go into to prove things like the last glacial maximum, the Ice Age, stuff like that. Also, haplogroup H comes from a refugia, which is a really interesting thing. Just like the last thing with this R1A haplogroup that's found in the Ashkenazi Levites, that's interesting. Not important, like Richard said. It's interesting. It's an interesting genetic thing how a specific line can end up being so prolific, even along the same subclade in the same tribal group. And that's what haplogroup H is for a lot of Stone Age Europeans. And it's spread all throughout the Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa. It's a really, really prolific ancient maternal haplogroup that originates in Europe with a European group of people. It does not originate with Israelites whatsoever. Finding a haplogroup H in a first century Jerusalem tomb tells you almost nothing about ethnic origin. Yeah, I'd love to see, I'd love to see the male burial. I would. I don't know why they wouldn't have looked at that haplogroup. I also would like to see autosomal DNA. I'd also like to see the archaeological context. Those things would be really important as well to actually ascertain ethnic origin. Because again, you can have a haplogroup and be incredibly mixed with somebody. That doesn't prove anything. Haplogroup H originates way older than Israel, but you'll deny that because that denies the Bible. Again, to use an analogy, I use this in my paper, and I think it's really important. If I found the maternal haplogroup A2, which is common amongst Native Americans, and let's say that I found that it had tuberculosis in it and it was buried in a Roman tomb, that wouldn't somehow prove that the Native Americans are the lost tribe of Israel, which is what he's trying to do with this whole maternal haplogroup H burial at a tomb, and somehow because of the disease prevalence. Yeah, the studies that he's citing from about these diseases don't mention haplogroup H, and other female haplogroups, mtDNA haplogroups, were present in these places, like in Wales and in Spain. Yeah, and they also were affected. That's because these diseases aren't being caused by some sort of curse from the God of Israel. No, no, no. They're being caused by a massive increase of city development and, and I don't want to say industrialization because that's not right, but a massive increase of trade with foreign places that already had these diseases. And yeah, Western Europe did get hit pretty hard. Other places got hit hard as well. And there's no proof that one specific haplogroup or female haplogroup were particularly hit worse than others. Because again, like even in Wales, you can find multiple different haplogroups and subclades. So it's really, this criteria doesn't actually prove anything, and I wasn't convinced by it whatsoever. I mean, these diseases pre-exist these places. These diseases come from a different place. They were brought there largely through trade. The reason why they impacted these places so hard is because of the increase of city planning and city development and trade with foreign places, and other places got hit hard by them as well. And you can find other haplogroups in these areas. So associating the disease with some curse from the Bible, and then with this tomb, some Roman era tomb in Jerusalem, and saying that somehow proves that we're Hebrews. I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. That's all I've got for this one.
All right. Moving on to criteria 5. 5 minutes for Rich. Please begin, sir.
Okay, real quick, they do mention haplogroup H. Math is.
All right, guys, let's take a little break from the haplogroup Christian identity bullshit. I covered today on the show Jake Shields and Owen Benjamin and Dan Bilzerian. Jake was attacking me. Here's Nick responding. He gets a super chat asking about what the shit they were talking on the stream they did. Breaking news clip.
Mr. Taggart sent $25. Did you see Jake Shields' podcast post today calling you controlled opposition with Jew Bilzerian? What a retard.
Literally, who cares? See, some people, it matters what they say, like Tucker Carlson, because he has a massive platform. It doesn't matter what Jake Shields says to anyone at any time because he's an idiot. So, I mean, he could say anything about me that he wants, and it doesn't matter. Simply put, nothing that will ever leave his mouth ever matters to anybody. Because he is stupid. Anybody that matters can recognize that he has brain damage, and so no one who is serious will ever listen, so it doesn't matter.
So true.
Simply put. I mean, the guy's a retard. The way he talks, the way he writes, he's a low IQ, ignorant retard. So he can have any opinion about me that he wants. It honestly doesn't matter. So, I mean, he likes me, he doesn't like me. I don't think he knows where he's at half the time. So, does not
Diego
matter.
de Urrea at $100. Sneak likes.
And Dan Bilzerian, I mean, it's literally Dumb and Dumber. Dan Bilzerian is dumb, and Jake Shields is dumber. Dan Bilzerian is like, fucking this, and it's fucking Jews. And then Jake Shields, I mean, it's literally Dumb and Dumber. It's like Dan Kazarian is one of the dumbest people alive, and Jake Shields is dumber than that. I mean, he's just retarded. So one guy is as dull and stupid as a person can be, and the other guy has brain damage. And that's the coalition. They're out there in Vegas. The two of them are out there in Vegas. The desert heat has melted their brains. And Jake Shields is like, what is the henchman of, he's like Igor. He's just like this stupid mutant that follows Dan Bilzerian around. Biggest brown noser of all time. It's kind of scary. He just will do, Dan Bilzerian says jumps, Jake Shields says how high. Dan Kazarian says fucking jump. And Jake Shields goes, how high. Like, Jake Shields is just a slave to Dan Kazarian. I don't even take it personally. I don't take it personally because Jake Shields is just a slave to Dan Kazarian. We'll just do anything he says, totally obedient. He's just like a puppy. So I kind of feel it's like
Dan's probably hooked him up with like trips and all types of cool stuff. So he's loyal to Dan, his friend, who's part Jewish. And I think that's why he's seething so much about me, is just because I told the truth that Lucas really did tell me that story about taking the phones and saying sus stuff before Nick said it, months before. That's all. So he's so mad. He keeps pushing this idea that me and Nick and Lucas are all part of some Mossad op to bring down Dan so he doesn't beat Randy Fine. Like, give me a break. The only reason they even said anything is because they were all calling them feds anyway. Anyway, yeah, the guys that just started talking about Jews and still get everything wrong 5 minutes ago, you know, are going to call the people that have been doing this a decade and have the actual track record and credibility. Like, they can call shots on anything. All right.
Matheson et al. In 2009, you stated that they did not mention haplogroup H. They did. All four of those was in Matheson et al., and that's why I included it. H is in Basque Country in Wales, like I said. V in Fennoscandia, T in Eastern European Udmurts, and W in Finland. Also, the diseases were highest in Europe. I never said they didn't occur somewhere else. I said they were highest in Europe. You brought up mutation rates. Those can occur at any time. And again, we've already discussed this repeatedly. In fact, we should have a debate on just carbon dating. They are going to be skewed by the dating of the remains. That's how we're getting those dates. And also, they are assumptions. So I believe you're being intellectually honest. They are assumptions. There is a mathematical
back to the Spurs
occurred. I'm not just using just that mutation. I'm using archaeological historical record as well as these genetic tests, and then of course scripture. Also, please don't let Aiden, trick you into thinking that he is the one who doesn't have a religious bias. Being a pagan and believing in the gods that he has, he does have a vested interest in disproving Christianity so that his gods are real. He has a bias against my study before he even reads it. So please don't be deceived by that. I'm simply being honest that I believe Jesus is Lord and is God over all, and he is acting like he's purely science. Criterion 5 is dairy tolerance. His objection was that lactase persistence developed in European steppe populations thousands of years before any Israelite migration. That again goes back to arguing over C14. My response is that he's correct that the mutation was under selection in steppe populations according to the science that says, oh, our carbon is accurate. That would be before biblical timelines, but modern science doesn't actually account for the flood narrative and the changes to carbon levels as a result of the flood. And the flood is not just a biblically recorded event. If he wants to press me on that, we can talk about, who has recorded it as well. The criterion also does not require Europeans receive lactase persistence from Israelites. It requires that the population satisfying all 8 criteria possesses the highest lactase persistence on earth, consistent with a pastoral covenant people. In other words, the population has to satisfy this. They have to be lactase persistent or tolerant. the truth is, and I hope, Aiden, you'll at least concede to this, Europeans are the highest with a 90% and up lactase persistent, and the rest of the world is 25% or less. And so if we're looking for people that drink milk according to the Bible, there's one population that can fit that. That doesn't mean every haplogroup within that population. Again, I'm not arguing all Europeans are Israelites, but I do believe that the evidence points to haplogroup R over and over. And yes, haplogroup R has a high dairy tolerance. If the Proto-Israelite lineage shared deep ancestry with steppe pastoralists, R from the Shemite pool, high dairy tolerance is a heritage trait. Now, I would argue, okay, that haplogroup I, which are the indigenous Europeans, also have a high tolerance because they're also Shemitic. So I do not believe they're descendants of Jacob. I do believe they're descendants of Shem, which goes back to one of my foundational beliefs that there's 3 genetic pools on Earth primarily, and science does show this, and that they all correlate to the 3 sons of Noah. So I and J.
See, so you can just tell. You can't take this guy serious, anything he says. Because in his view, the Bible's real and Jesus is God. So his whole world is through that lens that all of that has to be true. You know, I guess if drinking a lot of milk makes you a true Israelite, then call me a chosen person, because I drink milk like nobody's business and always have. Love milk. So I guess I'm an Israelite. I'm a European, drink milking Levite priest.
And R, I would expect them to have some level of dairy tolerance, and R, being the Israelite, to have the highest of that trait. Abraham came from proximate to steppe ancestral populations. So Abraham's people, the Shemitic people that I'm mentioning, they come from and from the Anatolian region and area. That's exactly where the Abrahamic peoples are supposed to come from.
European milkers.
Corroborated by the fact that haplogroup I and J are sibling subclades. They're not just kind of related, they're sibling subclades, and R is a later genetic mutation. So this criterion carries less independent weight than 1 through 3, but it's convergent, not standalone. And I appreciate my time. Thank you, Aiden. Thank you, everybody.
All right, 5 minutes for Aiden.
Real quick, Aiden, before you go, anybody that is on Rumble and YouTube, if you could give us a quick like. If you don't have an account, go ahead and make one.
I didn't realize this was on YouTube. I want to read the comments.
Back to the show.
Whenever you're ready.
So, Rich, you do say a lot of things about the prior one, and you do kind of jump ahead rather than just sticking to it. So I can't respond to everything that you said, but just one of the first things that you said was that that the haplogroup H is mentioned in those studies. I was specifically talking about the studies on the diseases like Schunemann et al. And Inskip et al., where it doesn't mention haplogroup H was particularly affected, or it doesn't even mention haplogroups being particularly affected. So, yeah, maybe haplogroup H was mentioned in another study you cited, but not the ones that I mentioned in my paper, which is also what I was responding to in your paper. So again, with the Israel must have a high dairy tolerance. Okay, so I did find this one to be really funny because, yeah, Europeans are the highest dairy tolerant people in the world. We know that. That's a really common meme, both in the pro-white scene and also in Indo-European studies. Why? Because it's in the steppe, not near in Mesopotamia in the Middle East. No, but on the Pontic-Caspian steppe in Ukraine, in Europe. That's where that group, that people, that founding stock of R1b, R1a peoples, also some I, also some other haplogroups. That's where those people originated from, and that's where this you get the beginning of pastoralism, which is where they start to raise cattle specifically. Other groups had already been raising goats and stuff. That's not relevant to this specific gene and the persistence of lactate specifically. And so there's one study in particular that is, and there's been many others after it that corroborated with it, but the one that found the allele that is a gene that's associated with lactose tolerance, it's the CT13910 allele. And yeah, they dated it to approximately 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. There's a reason why there's such a wide array, and it's because some people have argued that you can find the alleles that are associated with this allele in much older populations of people who had already been raising goats and sheep.
Guys, I just had an interesting idea for a video. Maybe I could get all of these schizo, flat earth, Christian identity Nazis calling me an Edomite off my back if I just like chug a bunch of raw milk or something. But then they'll be like, well, how do we know he didn't have diarrhea later though? Should I just do like a milk, a small hat milk chug challenge? Didn't there used to be some internet challenge where you try to drink like a whole gallon of milk or something? I remember some, like, when I was like a freshman in high school, there was like some older football players that they had like a who could drink the most milk contest. And I remember seeing the dude try to drink a whole gallon and then throw up and barf all over the place. I think I could do a whole gallon. Dude, I'll sit down with a box of cereal and go through, or some chocolate chip cookies and go through half a gallon of milk in one sitting. No joke. Or if I eat some Mexican food, some spicy Mexican food, and then chug milk along with it, easy 4 or 5 glasses in a sitting.
And horses. Horse milk was some of the first milk that we ever actually consumed prior to cattle milk. But it wasn't until around 5,000 years ago that you get these pastoral.
Drink a gallon of milk, film it, 24-hour live stream showing that I don't have any diarrhea. We'll go to the toilet cam. I'll film the toilet after I go poop and confirm that I can drink milk, and all the Jew jacketing accusations will go away. The DNA tests, childhood photos, all of that didn't work, but the milk challenge, that'll satisfy the schizo haters and trolls, I'm sure.
Pastoralist people on the steppe who were really focused on cattle herding. And these people were the biggest cattle herders in the world. Nothing that you see in Israel, nothing that you see in Mesopotamia. They did have cattle at a certain point. That's because they, ended up getting these lines later on. Same with horses. These people are also associated with the spread of horse breeding, chariot riding, things of that nature.
Milk
Chariots aren't
Max.
found in the Middle East.
I'll do like a TikTok, be like, dude, what Aryan Jesus milk mogging, and just go, just chug it. Milk mog. I'm the milk mogger. What's up, bro? My name's the milk. I'm a milk maxer. Lactose respecter.
Those are the most ancient source material on writing that we can find. The first chariots you find with these
Yeah.
pastoralist Indo-Europeans, Proto-Indo-Europeans like the Yamnaya, the Strubnaya.
The milk challenge would shut down the Jew jacketers. I think that's might be what it takes. Finally convince all these schizos.
Stredny Stog, and other related descendant cultures. Israel is not one of those descendant.
If you don't drink milk, you're not white.
Subclades of the haplogroups associated with
Be like the Aryan milk challenge.
And so ultimately, this is another weak and shaky argument because you can find this gene. You can find this gene, this allele. You can find that outside of the pastoralists. This happens through genetic drift. This is where, because of mixing, like say I go and I live with a bunch of Africans, it's possible that after 1,000 years, my genes become dominant, especially positive genes that code for things that are really useful, like drinking milk. And that's why you can find varying levels of this gene across the world. I also do want to point out there are other genes associated with lactose tolerance in other parts of the world. It's not just this specific allele, but this allele is the one that originated on the Pontic-Caspian steppe with the Proto-Indo-Europeans, not in not in Israel. And again, the ancient Israelites are not, especially the ancient Levantine peoples associated with the Israelites, they're not particularly high in lactose tolerance. It is Europeans who have that. And just as a final note, I know I'm probably running out of time.
Yep, 1 minute.
There is a Taoist text that mentions some Chinese group as coming from the land of milk and honey, and they're not particularly lactose tolerant, and yet they still have a myth that says that. It's almost like milk and honey are signs of wealth rather than some sort of gene and allele. Maybe that's the case. I would assume that that's probably where that biblical quote comes from, not any sort of specific association with lactose tolerance.
No, I think that's what I looked up. They go, oh, it's the land of milk and honey, and I looked up how much milk were ancient Israelites drinking. That's what I asked. Let's do a quick. Can we do that, please? Let's do that again. I want to ask that same question. Were ancient Israelites drinking lots of cow milk?
Not
Maybe
really.
shouldn't have said cow
At least
milk.
not lots of cow's milk. Ancient Israelites drank plenty of milk, but it mostly came from goats and sheep, not cows. Cattle were mainly for plowing fields, while sheep and goats were far more common for dairy, wool, and meat. Their bones dominate archaeological digs. The
famous land flowing with milk and honey was a metaphor for abundance. Milk from flocks is daily staple, honey is a rare treat. Fresh milk spoiled fast without refrigeration, so they usually turned it into yogurt, cheese, butter, or sour drinks. Yeah, I don't know why I said cows.
No.
Oh, wait, that's not where I want to go. Here we go.
All right, moving on to criteria 6, 5 minutes for Rich. Please begin.
All right. Aiden, I'm able to address the points that you're making within the 5 minutes. I think you should be able to do the same. You did conveniently leave out Matheson in your response, and that is one of the studies, and they converge to.
Yeah, good point, Money Music. It says in Isaiah 60 or 61 that they're going to suck the milk of the Gentiles, right? Or is it drink the milk of the Gentiles, suck the breast, something like that. Yeah, that they're not talking about literal milk. They mean like the wealth and abundance.
Together to make the same point. And my primary point was that only dairy tolerant people could be Israelites. Not that all dairy tolerant people are Israelites, but only dairy tolerant people could be Israelites, and haplogroup R fits within that. Again, the Allel, occurring thousands of years prior, I would argue against the C14, but let's say it did. It still doesn't matter. My argument is not that all dairy tolerant people are Israelites. That's how you treated the argument. The Bible specifically lists cattle as one of their livestock and one of their primary, and that Solomon drank milk from cows specifically. So Asian milk isn't automatically the same. Okay, so criterion 6, prophetic amnesia. His objection is that Celtic VSO, or verb subject object syntax, has an internal pi explanation. Number 2, Anglo-Saxon law is Germanic, not Hebrew. Number 3, Celtic Saturday Sabbath is a 19th century fabrication. We're going to test that. Number 4,
prophetic amnesia. Hold on.
My responses are:
is that their cope? That's their cope of why all the Europeans don't remember that they're actually the real Israelites, and there's no proof of it because they have prophetic amnesia. God gave, we're the real Israelites because God gave us amnesia, dude. God pulled out his Men in Black taser and was like, you were never Israelites. You will forget. Come on. Yeah, dude, we just magically forgot who we were, according to the prophetic amnesia. Come on, dude. Yeah, there's no evidence, and they had no idea that they were Torah following lost Israelites because, God gave us amnesia, bro.
On linguistics, the 1872 Strauss source is a doctor. He is making the case. I'm not presenting no.
Meanwhile, the Jews since ancient times that have been circumcising their boys and following Torah and keeping kosher and following the commandments, even when in exile, they're not the real Jews. The people with amnesia are the real Jews. Come on, what a cope. Amnesia. Will Smith came and wiped our memories, right? That is so funny.
Linguists or no one who has any sort of knowledge in that area. I don't claim to be a linguist. I'm citing someone else's work. The Celtic VSO syntax does align with biblical Hebrew even more, and I go over this in my study, even more than it does with modern Hebrew and even more than with Arabic. So we have to explain why there's an affinity there at the very least. Okay, now I'm submitting that's because it's part of the amnesia. Of course, Aiden would argue against that. On Celtic Church,
yeah,
scholarly.
Dude, he's really giving prophetic amnesia copes. Oh, we didn't know our Hebrew language anymore because he gave us amnesia. Convenience, very convenient. The tribe of Daniel Bilzerian, 12% real Jew. Yep.
Consensus.
Yeah, you not remembering is proof that it's real.
Adamans, Vita Columbae records practices differing from Roman convention, including rest day observance. The unified, quote, Celtic Church versus Rome framing is partly Reformation era, but distinctive Sabbatarian resonant practices are attested. And Aiden, I can give you those citations. The Celtic Church was doing this early, and it was not as a result of Catholicism. It was a result of receiving the gospel from someone else other than the Catholics. On the Scythian origins, he says Norse and Irish traditions connect us to the Scythians and offers this as proof they're not Israelites. But Scythia is precisely where 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6 places the Assyrian exile. Quote, Hala, Habor, and the river Gozan in the cities of the Medes. Okay, so this eventually became Scythian land. So the idea that there's no connection there makes no sense. The Israelites get taken north to Assyria and into what becomes Scythian land. And then even the Declaration of Arbeth, which we'll discuss more later, indicates that that's where the Scots came from, that they came from Scythia, which is where the Israelites were. And the Scots themselves indicate that they left some 1,200 years after the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, which we'll get to that later. That's on the next criterion. So these are all located, these places that 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6 indicates the Israelites went to, they're all located along the steppe corridor that we would call Scythia. If medieval monks independently recorded their ancestors as coming from that geography, it is consistent with, not contrary to, the exile thesis. So if he tries to say, oh, they came from Scythia, I'm saying the same thing. It's not actually defeating my argument. And then on the amnesia, he argues that if they were Israelites, they would have remembered upon becoming Christian. But the prophecy states they would forget, that they would become lost sheep, and they would forget their resting place. In Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 6, the amnesia is not a weakness in the thesis. It is the thesis. They forgot.
He actually said it. You're right. He's like, there being no evidence in them not remembering, or that they followed the Torah and circumcised and kept kosher and fled, were the tribes of Israel. Them not remembering that or having any written document of that, that's actually proof that it's real. Crazy. What verse is he even citing that, what prophecy is he going to cite in the Old Testament that says that they're going to forget who they are? And is it going to be some vague thing like, oh, God, the Jews, you know, falling away to follow idols, like the theme that they're always saying? Or like, oh, you did not keep my commandments and you followed after foreign. I wonder what the verse is. I feel like I've asked this question before and got it. Yeah, no proof equals proof. Christ logic. Citing Evan Williams?
Yeah, I would say that the amnesia is convenient, would be my argument.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the language, man, yeah, so that's an old theory, and it's been debunked with a massive amount of linguistic studies. I mean, the modern linguistic studies are probably one of the most robust studies that we have for the ancient world. The Proto-Indo-European is a fairly well-accepted reconstructed language. It's the only language that we know we can reconstruct, and it's based off of shared morphology. It's based off of a wide array of similar sounds. The verb, subject, order, the VSO, that's not as relevant. And there's really not a lot of similarities between ancient Hebrew and any European language, specifically also the Gaels. So just to give some insight into this, linguistic thing, in the 1600s, European travelers to India, they began to notice similarities between English, Latin, Greek, Sanskrit, and Persian. And specifically, you had some scholars like Culanes and Herms who were also realizing that there's common cultural similarities between all these peoples. It's because of the massive Proto-Indo-European, Indo-European, or what we would call Aryan invasions spread from the Pontic-Caspian steppe where these people originated from, taking languages, taking culture, taking mythology, taking genetics.
Dude, it's kind of good all these Christian identities are taking these L's in these debates recently. I saw Arvel had a debate with a Christian identity guy, wrecked him. I know he just had another Christian identity guy on. I don't know if he pushed back as much on this latest one. I haven't seen the whole thing yet. But I hope we're done with that. How many times do these idiots need to lose a debate before we stop taking them seriously and just tell them to shut up and go away? You could destroy them on every single debate point, and they will never concede anything, and they will never stop because they have a religious bias and agenda.
These places, to the subcontinent, to parts of the Middle East, not all of the Middle East, and mainly to Europe and Eurasia. And it was through these early studies that we have this, this theory that perhaps there is some sort of wide-arcing Indo-European language family. But the scholars at the time were all Christian, and they had a major issue with the differences between Hebrew and these Indo-European languages. And that was something that you see a lot in the early scholarship. It's like an anxiety that they were going through, realizing that, oh, hang on a second, the story of our people is actually a lot more complex than just what this ancient text from the Levant has to say. And so then, especially as secularism was rising, you see a really, really in-depth, tons of methodology. Again, thousands of papers and hundreds of scholars have worked on archaeogenetics, comparative mythology, linguistics, and none of them agree with this whole idea, which is an 18th century idea, that the Gaelic or Celtic language is somehow related to Hebrew. I mean, it's a very fringe old idea that has been put to rest. It was put to rest even back then. It's definitely not at all the prevailing theory. It doesn't have as much evidence to it. Linguistics is a very complex study. I mean, like, Like a great example would be like laryngeals. Most people have no idea what that is. Most people have no idea why there's aspirated sounds and not. Why do we drop one letter and we pick up another one in two different languages that we know are related?
Hence St. Andrews in Scotland.
Argument. But when it pertains to the British Isles, it's just Gildas and Tertullian and Eusebius. They're not good enough. They are like Saint Bede saying, "Oh, this saint did this thing," and so therefore later, 2,000 years later, we're supposed to believe him. He might be writing about an event that was 200 years before his time. He wasn't getting contemporary accounts. It's the same thing with all three of those sources. They were not writing in a contemporary period. They were writing. The earliest one is over 150 years after, and then each one subsequently gets further away until you get to the Declaration of Arbroath, which was written in the 1300s. That's a long time ago. The supposed apostolic arrival to Britain. That's literally over 1,000 years afterwards. And if you read the Declaration of Arbroath closely, they are specifically saying they come from Scythia. Scythia, not Israel. They mention the Israelites, and they do not say that they come from the Israelites. They're saying they come from the Scythians, which at that time the Christian church associated with the Scythians with Gomer and Magog and Japheth, who you claim is the Asiatic person. Which again, I'm going to make some comments about some of your claims about the sons of Noah, because you go against basically every major denomination, and you go against the things that some of these ancient writers would have believed according to their denomination's orthodoxy. They would have thought that the Scythians came from Japheth, just like they thought that many of the Europeans came from Japheth, who you're then saying is the father of the Asians. It goes totally against all major denominations, even the denominations of these monks that you're citing from. So it's really just not good enough. And I do want to talk more about the Declaration later if you'd like to dive deeper into that, because it's very careful about the language that it's using. Good.
All right, moving on to the final criteria. 5 minutes for Rich. Please begin.
All right, explaining everything away as rhetorical too easily dismisses the accolades of the historian. That's my point. We can't just call it rhetorical. We have to address it the way the historian wrote it, and they wrote it as fact. This is important. Peter writes to areas in Anatolia that were speaking Gaelic, that we knew Israelites were there, Celtic, I'm sorry, they were speaking Celtic. And it is based on the argument that I'm making. Those original 11 are the ones who ended up going into Europe as a result of speaking to where they knew where the Israelites were. They found out where additional Israelites were. We do find Christianity in the British Isles prior to the Romans. I cited that earlier in the criteria that we are finding it. The Celtic Church is established, and this is verifiable both in my study and in what I've shared today. We do share that the Celtic Church is established prior to Roman Catholicism. They did not receive the Roman version of Christianity. Paul and others went to Gentiles, so you brought up Egypt and what have you. Paul and others did go to Gentiles, so I expect the gospel to be going to more than just Europe. It's who went to Europe, and it is the 11 that went to Europe. Judas had passed away. I'm also happy to address Japheth later. Probably a good time would be the open discussion. You are absolutely right. I do not agree with the consensus, and that comes down to the Greeks making their own claim of being Shemitic.
How about this? All of Christianity was about going to the Gentiles, not to the Jews. Paul's the apostle to the Gentiles. It's all a bunch of non-Jews that ended up becoming Christians. How does that make any sense? If Europeans are really Israelites, why are they calling them Gentiles and targeting them with Christianity? Why do they have to, if the Gentiles that adopted Christianity were already the natural branches, why would they need to be grafted in if they're already the root? How about that? That's a good argument against these guys, a biblical argument. Paul says that the Jews, the Pharisees that rejected Jesus, who he thinks are the Edomites, this guy thinks are the Edomites, he calls them the root. He calls them Israel. And he calls them the natural branches. He calls those Jews that rejected Jesus the natural branches, and the Gentiles, the Greeks, the Romans, needed to be grafted in as the wild branches. That right there destroys his whole Europeans are the true Israelites theory, right? Just with that. How many different ways have we completely, ripped apart? Any one of these debunks, his whole house of cards collapses. We've debunked it like I lost track of how many different ways.
Which I will.
Yeah, so according to Jesus, the Edomites sit on Moses' seat, right, noticer? Exactly.
I think you saw it in the study, and also the cargo that was coming from Tarshish specifically. We'll discuss that later. Okay, criterion 8, north and ends of the earth. That's where Israel's supposed to be. This was the last of the criteria, and then I share the PCA map. Europeans were already in Europe before Israel existed. That is his primary objection. My response is that this is a straw man. Criterion 8 is about prophetic geography, not migration mechanics. It does not explain how the Europeans arrived. I'm not arguing that. We can talk about it, but that's not what the criteria is addressing. It observes that the prophets describe Israel's last days location in precise terms. The lands of the north, because they went north from Assyria into even further lands, and the ends of the earth, the literal geographic ends of the earth. And asks, this criterion asks, which haplogroup dominates those regions? And regardless of how Aidan would like to interpret this, the truth is, north of the Levant, in the places where the maternal haplogroups are pointing, where the apostles are going to, where dairy tolerance is highest, is haplogroup R. And then at the ends of the earth happens to be the exact same haplogroup. South America, places like Buenos Aires or what have you, descendants of Spain and Italy and what have you, they are haplogroup R dominantly. South Africa, dominant R. Australia.
So the Bible says the Jews are going to be scattered to the four corners of the earth, which is obviously just like metaphor and some like, BS threat. So, but then only the Europeans are the lost Israelites, or are there lost Israelites everywhere, all over the earth? Another like total schizo based on the Bible arguments.
Dominant R. New Zealand, dominant R. These are all places that, once again, affirm haplogroup R went to exactly the place. So you've got Ashkenazi Levites who are endogamous, who are carrying this signature of R, and I understand there's R1A and B, but those two are buried together at Megiddo, and then they end up going into these regions in the north and at the ends of the earth through colonization and a number of processes, and as a result,
Yeah, Rain. The mental gymnastics required for this LARP are wild. Yeah, they're the most pathetic, if you think about it, of the Christians.
Fulfill the prophecy. So Aidan, I'm asking you this, okay? What are the chances that haplogroup R is meeting every single one of these criteria? It has to be astronomically absurd to assume that haplogroup R does meet all of these, but no, they couldn't possibly be the Israelites. That just sounds like prejudice. I'm following the data where it leads, and the data leads me north and at the ends of the earth.
1 minute.
Those are the groups that are there. That fulfills my time. Thank you.
All right, 5 minutes for Aidan.
Yeah, so interesting arguments, Rich, but I'm not convinced, because a lot of the things that you associate with haplogroup R can be associated with a wide array of different haplogroups, and specifically, it's the subclade thing in particular. The R1A subclade that's associated with Levites is a totally different subclade than the one that's associated with different European groups, and they know when these subclades diverged based off of genetic data, not just carbon dating. Again, carbon dating can be corroborated through different methods. One of them being different genetic studies that can tell points of divergence. And they specifically place these points of divergence in the Near East associated with mixed regions, which is exactly what the Romans have to say about these people. It's exactly what Assyrians have to say about these people. And no, if I'm prejudiced, I am prejudiced against these Hebrew people, both the modern ones and the ancient ones. Even in the ancient world, they weren't very well liked now, were they? They were combinations. You can disagree with them, but the monks and saints and people that you probably have great respect for, that's what they believed, and that's what they affirmed. And if you look at the ancient prophecies supposedly associated with the Japhethites, with Europeans, it much more aligns with our current situation. I do not think that haplogroup R has been especially blessed by some Hebrew god. You can find haplogroup R in all sorts of different races. There's literally haplogroup R people living in Chad, and they're black men, okay? That doesn't mean anything. So I don't think that you can really make these arguments and make them fit. And to be honest, if I'm prejudiced against Hebrews, I think you're also prejudiced against modern Hebrews. You're trying to take...
Oh, I thought he was going to say white
You're trying to
people.
take their history. You're denying your own people's history.
Yes.
Thousands of years of your people's history. Like, the Bible doesn't mention the Kukateni Tripilia culture. It doesn't mention the bell beakers. It doesn't mention the corded ware. It doesn't mention the Strubnaya. It doesn't mention the ancient Indo-Aryans. It doesn't mention the Andronovo culture. It doesn't mention the Takarians. It doesn't mention the Sintashta. It doesn't mention massive amounts of European history. It doesn't mention any of the Epigrammatians from the Stone Age. Like, we have their cave art. Like, we know these people existed and that they're a unique, distinct group of Europeans, and we carry their genetics. And we can prove that we carry their genetics. We can prove where our languages come from. We can prove where our archaeology comes from. We can prove where our genetics come from. And it has nothing to do with Israel. So even if you're making the argument that we carry some sort of prophetic gifts from these people, my argument would be that you could probably just associate those gifts with the modern Hebrews, who you just don't like, and that you're trying to claim their history because you're a Christian, and you're prejudiced against your own people's history, and you're prejudiced against the gifts that these people have been given by their God, not our God. So we can get into the rest of it now, I'm sure.
Wrecked. Good job. Wrecked.
Right, so that concludes the segment of the Israelite study. And now we can move into the segment for the PCA maps. Before we start the timer, I believe you guys had some visuals you wanted to pull up on the screen here for that segment.
And if not, that's okay. You can try. I did want to ask, did you want, if there's multiple PCA maps, did you want 5 minutes per PCA map, or do you think you can cover that in 5 minutes, Rick?
All right, let's not do the maps. It's been
as far as
almost 2.5 hours. He's already lost. I don't need to see anymore. He's lost on too many points already. Too retarded, too wrecked, too gay. Finish him, fatality. He's already finished. I've seen enough. Seen enough. We're going to close out with Christoboria from our very own Evan Williams songs. Yahweh's Greatest Soldier. Top Shabos Noahide Goy. It was a massacre. CI BTFO'd once again. The truth prevails. All right. Christoboria. Let's see this. I learned today that another one of the biggest influencers online that does the Christian identity bullshit. Turns out he's a convict that spent 14 years in prison where he learned about Christian identity and then started his website as soon as he got out of 14 years in the slammer. That's your authority. Christian identity copers. Good night, guys. See you tomorrow.
Welcome to Hyperborea, an Aryan land of eternal spring. Beyond the north wind, homeland of Moses, Abraham, and Yeshua HaMashiach. Welcome to Hyperborea, an Aryan land where time stands still. Beyond the north wind, an Aryan Israelite paradise. When Hashem made Hyperborea, it was the pinnacle of all his creation. It was a perfect Aryan nation. Then some evil pagans began to worship false gods. They caused a cataclysmic flood that destroyed Christ's birthplace and the original Aryan homeland. Christoboreans unite, God's chosen people are.
Hail the old gods, down with fake and Jewish Yahweh. Forget about it.
To sin, and their evil gods cursed us all to lose our Aryan Israelite identity to the sands of time. Hashem had given the Torah and 10 Commandments to Moses in Hyperborea, but they were lost in the flood. He had to write them again on Mount Sinai. All the history of Europeans, Israelites was lost because he had amnesia from being beaten unconscious for trying to circumcise pagans. Welcome to Hyperborea, an Aryan land where time stands.
Amnesia.
On the north wind, Hyperborea was perfect until pagans started worshipping trees and rocks, which greatly angered Hashem. He flew into a righteous white rage and said, "Fuck you, pagans have cursed Hyperborea with their son, and it must be utterly destroyed to stop it from spreading to the rest of the world." Welcome to Hyperborea, and everyone here is a giant area. Beyond the north wind, all Europeans descend from Hyperborea. What happened next inspired the story of Noah. They had to create an ark to escape Hyperborea because it was flooding thanks to the pagans. Jesus Christ, Moses, and Abraham were all carpenters, so they built an ark big enough to hold millions of Proto-European tribes in about a week. And then they set sail for a suitable new homeland. That homeland was Israel. And after the events of the Bible, all the tribes of Hyperborea spread out to different parts of Europe. Christoboreans unite, God's chosen people are white. We are the true Aryan Israelites.
Dude, that is such a fire chorus.
God's chosen people are white. We are the true Aryan Israelites.